This video is a compilation of 6 different challenge playthroughs that I've embarked on in the Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion. Some were certainly more challenging than others. One of them involves role-playing as a beloved character that went MIA in Morrowind. Another involves trying out a class and playstyle for the very first time. Thrown into the mix as well is seeing if one of the feebler NPC classes in the game can beat the most combat-intense storyline. Down below, each episode has been timestamped, so feel free to browse around and see if anything piques your interest. The playthroughs go as follows. Can a level 1 Conjuror beat the arena? Can a Beggar beat the Fighters Guild questline? Can an Orc Barbarian beat the Thieves Guild questline? Can Glarthir be kept alive long enough for him to complete his rampage? Can a first-time Stealth Archer beat the Mages Guild? And can Caius Cosades, that's a point of contention, beat the arena? Coming up in the near future are plenty more challenge runs, and the idea is to up the stakes and make things more difficult. As an aside, putting out compilations like these gives me time to reset, go back to the drawing board, and in this case, finish up my vacation. And just so you know, your support means the world to me. With all that out of the way, let the journeys begin. In today's video, I wanted to try my hand at an Oblivion challenge playthrough. I've been watching a lot of Just Background Noises videos and was inspired to try my hand at this type of content. I had way more fun doing it than I thought I would, so I'd definitely like to make it a reoccurring series. If you enjoyed what you're about to see, leave some suggestions down below as to what faction or questline I should do next, and with what sort of playstyle. For my first challenge run, I wanted to start with something a little simpler. I decided to try my hand at going through the Arena's questline whilst playing as a level 1 Conjuror. That's the challenge laid out, and the duration is from the very first pit dog fight all the way to the final match with the Grey Prince. Here are the 4 rules in which I'll be playing by. I apologize if they seem complicated or lengthy, but I wanted to lay down the ground rules as best as I could. Number 1 is that I have to use skills that are only available to Conjurors. Unfortunately, there isn't a default Conjurer class that can be picked, so instead, I'll be creating one based off of the Conjurer NPCs. The most obvious major skill that I'll be taking is Conjuration. Then, where it gets interesting is that Conjurers are able to cast one spell from each school of magic, excluding Illusion. So, I'll take all of them as a major skill, barring Destruction, and will select only one spell from each of these schools to use in each arena match. Every new match results in the option of selecting new spells to use. The reason for the exclusion of Destruction is that it's a combat-focused skill group, and has the potential of taking away from the Conjuration aspect. Otherwise, any Conjuration spell that's available to me, I have free reign of using. New spells can only be acquired through purchasing them with arena winnings. That leaves 3 more major skills to be selected. Even though these aren't necessarily found in the NPCs, I'll take the small advantage of picking the light armor skill as it's mandatory to wear a raiment in the arena. Admittedly, I didn't realize that Conjurers were unable to cast illusion spells. I ended up selecting it as a major skill because of this confusion, but for the sake of this challenge, won't use it. As for the last one, I'll go with Athletics, simply for the purpose of balance as well as maneuvering around within the pit itself. Going through the tutorial section, I had no choice but to use non-relevant skills for combat, but rest assured, they won't be utilized at all for the challenge. Number 2 is that my overall level must remain at level 1. I can't advance in levels at all or else I fail the challenge. If I feel as though I'm truly stuck and need to level up, the challenge of beating it as a level 1 Conjurer is failed. But I'll continue to play along just to see how much more extra help I would need in order to beat the questline. Number 3 is that I'm allowed to use any consumables found within the tutorial area. Because the tutorial is absolutely necessary to go through, I figured might as well make use of the items along the way. Coupled with this, in between fights, I'm allowed to go to the shops within Cyrodiil in order to restock on consumables. The caveat to this though is I'm only allowed to spend the gold that I earned from my fights in the arena. I won't be collecting or spending any gold from the tutorial area or elsewhere. Also off limits are weapons that cannot be conjured up through magic, so any bows, axes, swords, warhammers, etc. found in the wild or in the Bloodworks are taboo. Number 4 is that I can't adjust the difficulty slider. The default difficulty is what I'll be playing at, and under no circumstances will it be changed. Some last details to add, No console commands are to be used, except if I've unfortunately conceded on accomplishing my main goal and need the extra help. I'm not allowed to have any followers, barring ones that are conjured up or given to me by the questline. Race and star sign are freebies, although the ones I'll be picking go hand in hand with the Conjuror NPC's profile pretty well. I'll be playing as a Breton, and I've picked the Mage star sign, which gives me a plus 50 buff to my magicka. Conjurers are often Bretons or High Elves, and they have a special Conjuror birth sign which also gives them a plus 50 bonus to their magicka. And finally, if I end up making it to Agranac Gromalog, the Grey Prince, I won't be doing his side quest, as the fight must be fair and square. For summary, only Conjurer skills can be used, I must be at least level 1, I can only obtain potions and spells through certain means, and the difficulty must stay as is. Without further ado, let's see how this Oblivion challenge plays out. For starters, my final haul from the tutorial area included 1 poison of illness, 3 potions of healing, 1 potion of night eye, 12 weak potions of healing, 4 weak potions of respite, and 6 weak potions of sorcery. This certainly felt like enough to get me through the first couple of ranks within the arena. Once arriving at the Imperial City, the first thing I did was head to the marketplace in order to see what I was working with. Going into Edgar's discount spells, I saw that he had a Bound Dagger spell for the purchase of 99 gold. I also saw that he had a Summon Scamp spell for 288 gold. These were definitely tools that I wanted in my arsenal. The next thing I did was pay a visit to the Gilded Carafe. Claudette Perrick had a plethora of health and sorcery potions available for purchase. I was good for now on consumables, but it was good to look at the prices and the amount of stock she had. It was now finally time to head over to the arena. Taking a look at my spells, I had Summon Skeleton for the Conjuration School, Protect for the Alteration School, Heal Minor Wounds for Restoration, and Minor Dispel for Mysticism. Going down into the Bloodworks, I scoured the arena to see if there would be anything available for me to use. In the favor of the challenge, there was nothing that I could utilize, so arena winnings would be the only way to acquire new things going forward. I went through with the administration process with Owen and selected light armor for my raiment of choice.
See if it fits okay. When you're ready for a match, I'll be waiting.
And so it began. My first fight in the arena as a level 1 Conjurer Pit Dog. I lined up outside the gate and got my hotkeys ready. I summoned my skeleton and got my hands ready for enormous amounts of blocking. One thing I didn't take into consideration was that the more I made the yellow team combatant chase me, the more my skeleton would need to chase her. So I figured for now, the best strategy would be to stand still, block the attacks, heal minor wounds, and let the skeleton hack away at her health. Fortunately, I was able to heal more of my health than she was able to take down, and soon my skeleton delivered the killing blow. I had forgotten that the first 2 fights of Pit Dog only garner you 50 gold for each win. Since I was saving up for the Bound Dagger first, I needed to win 1 more fight before I could actually start attacking the other combatants myself. For the second Pit Dog fight, I employed the same tactic of summoning a skeleton to do my dirty work while I took aggro, healed, and blocked. Something interesting about the arena is that the combatants never seemed to aggro onto my summons. They would completely bypass them and head straight for me. This time around, I finally started using the Alteration skill and would cast Protect. 10% shield isn't the easiest to notice, especially when you're unsure how much damage should be getting dealt to you. Like most combatants do, this one healed halfway through the fight, prolonging the final outcome. I kept with it and alternated back and forth between conjuring a skeleton and healing myself. Soon enough, the enemy was defeated, and I was able to spend some of my gold. With 1 septum left to spare, I purchased the Bound Dagger spell and was finally able to attack enemies in the arena. This next fight was an advancement match for the rank of Brawler. The next opponent was an archer. I at first wanted to see how effective I would be in my newfound close combat role. This was when I remembered that the Bound Dagger wouldn't actually be that powerful for me. My blade skill was abysmal, and the dagger itself hardly dealt any damage. I rushed in with Protect cast on me, and things were going okay until he decided to heal himself and negate all of my progress. Unfortunately as well, the bound dagger only lasts for 15 seconds, so by the time I was even able to reach him, it would practically be despawned. Eventually, I did what I should have done from the beginning and hid behind a column whilst my skeleton took care of the fight. It delivered the killing blow, and I was promoted to the rank of Brawler. It was nice to see that I would now be paid out 100 gold per win. I quickly visited Edgar Votrine to look at his spells one more time. I was really only interested in Summon Scamp, as the rest weren't necessary for me to have. For my first fight as a brawler, I started to develop a system which would eventually become my pre-match ritual. About halfway through the announcer's final bit of dialogue, I would cast Protect, Summon Skeleton, then Bound Dagger. A common issue I'd run into was keyboard panicking. If the fight wasn't concluded by the first round of summons and my health was low, I would fumble around with the hotkeys, wasting time and being counterproductive. I did put my athletics to use, as kiting around the arena would save my skin a whole lot whilst recalibrating my finger placement. The same sort of fight, runaway, and heal cycle continued for quite some time until finally the killing blow was delivered. I decided to just jump straight into the next fight.
4 wins is okay, kid, but it don't make you grand champion.
It was one of the ones I was dreading the most, a multiple opponent match. It was the Wood Elf sisters, and one fought with a bow while the other with a greatsword. I followed my usual plan and left the archer alone as the sword bearer came charging in. She unfortunately took great chunks out of my health with every hit. I would try to get her off my tail by running figure eights around the pit, but the archer kept nailing me from afar. This was the first match where I needed to pop some potions. I drank 1 potion of healing and continued onwards. Soon after though, I managed to defeat the sword-wielding sister. For the archer, I hid behind a pillar for a little bit while my skeleton hacked away at her, but I felt confident in my ability to finish the fight. I rushed in with the dagger and sliced away until she was dead. I got paid out the much needed 100 gold for that match, and finally had enough to return to Edgar's discount spells. I purchased the Summon Scamp spell and felt pretty confident about the next few fights. The only downside to it was that the Scamp would be conjured for only 20 seconds, while the skeleton lasted for around 40. Regardless, I got ready for my next match, which was for advancement to the rank of Bloodletter. The gates lowered and I'd cast all my spells. The Scamp ran up a few steps and let off a fireball at the Khajiit. What I didn't expect was for the Scamp to deal so much melee damage. It got in behind the yellow team combatant and began swiping away at him. All the meanwhile, I held it down from the front and took all of the aggro. The Scamp unfortunately despawned quickly and the Khajiit healed himself. I then proceeded to run around the arena for a bit while the Khajiit chased me down and took away the health points in which I had just spent magicka regenerating. Eventually, I was ready to stand my ground again and resummon the Scamp. In a beautifully swift movement, the Scamp unleashed its most powerful attack, which was honestly the MVP for this whole run, the running back shoulder drop. I was promoted to the rank of Bloodletter and now paid out 150 gold per every win. The payouts were certainly going a longer way, as now I could afford to buy more spells and a higher quantity of potions. I took a look at my Conjuration skill progress and saw that I was nearing the Journeyman mark. This would unlock a whole myriad of spells for me to try out and potentially enhance my experience within the arena. In fact, it was now that I decided to go and have a peek at some potential prospects in which I should save up for. I paid a visit to the Coral Mages Guild and spoke with Athragar first. He had an entire selection of bound weapons and armor available for purchase, as well as a plethora of creatures to summon. Next, I spoke with Alberic Lidda, who also had a big selection of bound weapons and armor, along with a smaller selection of creatures to summon. I was most interested in the bound war axe from Lidda, as it had better reach than the dagger, and I could use it right away. I returned back to the arena for my first fight as a Bloodletter, and in need of a little more winnings. This next match was against a mace-wielding Redguard, and had the quickest end result. I prepared myself with all the necessary spells, ultimately not ending up needing them. It turns out, the blue team's true combatant, my summoned Scamp, came to play today. He summoned the spirit of Marshawn Lynch and battered the Redguard repeatedly until he was flattened against the wall. The victory gave me the extra drakes needed to afford the bound war axe, as well as the bound helmet, and slowly, it seemed like this build playthrough was coming along together nicely. So far, I was having a lot of fun, abiding the rules I laid out for myself, and I hadn't died yet. The next opponent was pancaked the same way the red guard was. The gates lowered, and I cast all of my summons and spells. The scamp let off a fireball as the yellow team combatant came in for the attack. I got a few hits off with the war axe, but wasn't able to really test its capabilities. Before I knew it, Marshawn bashed her with those bony shoulders, and the fight was over. I jumped straight into the next fight, as I felt pretty good on potions and spells. Owen warned me that this next opponent would fight with both a bow and a sword, so I knew that this one had the potential to be easy. As soon as the Dunmer drew his bow, I knew that it was over. I summoned my scamp and hid behind the pillars. The Dark Elf was too focused on shooting at the columns, as my Conjuration was able to run up on him and mercilessly beat him down. He moved further back into the pit, and I followed. Getting in closer, my scamp used Fury Swipes and clawed the combatant to death, ending the match. This victory pushed me forward to Myrmidon, and I was now earning 200 gold per fight, certainly enough to guilt-free spend on new spells. Continuing on my hot streak, I flew into my next fight against Shimmerstrike. The Bosmer came running in, and I'm telling you, these combatants were all dropping like flies with the scamp and block strategy. I would hold my ground long enough for the Daedroth to shoulder bash and claw its way through the enemy's health. The fights lasted consistently for under 25 seconds, and my confidence in this build was growing steadily. Part of the reason that I wanted to experiment with the Conjuror build in the first place is because Conjuration was largely a skill class that I passed on whilst playing this game. In fact, pretty much all schools that aren't Destruction or Restoration go untouched by me, so it was nice to finally do something different. At the beginning of the next match, I reached Journeyman in Conjuration, which I was really thrilled about. This meant I now had a whole new array of spells that could be utilized in the fight, again, further diversifying my playthrough. Also, I stand corrected on a statement that I said before. This match was now my shortest, as it lasted a whopping 10 seconds. My War Axe dealt very little damage to the Altmer, which I learned as such many matches ago. The Scamp, however, was able to beat her down faster than it took for all of my active effects to wear off. I knew that the Scamp would prove a useful companion from the beginning, but I had no clue it would prove this effective in melee combat. From here, I figured it was time to pay a visit back to Athragar and Coral. Having 757 gold to spend, I purchased the Bound Mace spell for 530 septims. I was excited to see how much of an upgrade the mace would be compared to the dagger and war axe, but there was a slight oversight. Magicka cost per cast had never really played a factor in these fights before now. The gates lowered and I used Protect, Bound Helmet, and Bound Mace. Once those 15 seconds were up though, and the mace had disappeared, I didn't have enough Magicka to summon another. When I was finally able to do so, the cast had sapped all of my Magicka, and there was nothing left for a scamp or to heal. I popped 1 health potion and 2 weak potions of sorcery to counteract this, and from there, gave up on using the mace for the rest of the challenge. Since I'm to stay at level 1, all I have to work with is the base amount of health and Magicka that my character was given. This means that although I can now cast Journeyman level spells, I have to decide whether or not they're really worth it and could make a difference in battle. Luckily for me though, that victory promoted me to the rank of Warrior, and I was about halfway through with the arena's questline. The next fight was against a Nord with a longsword and a shield. I could definitely notice a difference in difficulty from Myrmidon to warrior rank. She hit really hard and her health wasn't depleting as quickly as the previous fighters. I was back to running figure 8s around the pit again. Fortunately, I had enough health to stand my ground and the scamp locked in, pummeling her and ending the fight. With 250 extra gold added to my purse, I fast traveled back to Coral and bought the Summon Dremora spell from Athragar for 539 gold. I was excited to use this one, as I assumed that since the Scamp was proving to be a formidable foe in the arena, the Dremora would only be that much better. Well, as it turns out, I was wrong. I think the Dremora was such a Magicka-hungry summon, and also only lasted for 20 seconds. The first bit of the fight, it looked more like it was sizing her up, and less like it was rushing in for the attack. Any hits it landed seemed to deal less damage than the Scamp was able to do. It despawned, and similar to the mace before it, I had to wait a bit to summon it again. I was then forced to block with my fists, because I had no Magicka left to conjure up my War Axe. But the Dremora Kaitif came in and delivered a massive blow to the spellcaster, and real soon, dealt the final strike. This was enough for me to realize, though, that maybe Marshawn Lynch was the better summon for my needs and abilities here. Anything that cost too much magicka to summon was detrimental to my ability to recover and resummon. The next match was my advancement match to Gladiator rank.
Your next opponent is the most savage, blood-crazed orc I've ever seen. And believe me, I've seen a lot of them. This will not be fun.
Like all athletes, sometimes they just have bad games because my scamp fought with a lot of mediocrity during the first summon. Figure 8ing around the arena, I was extremely low on health, and in order to regain it back, blew through my current magicka bar. Popping a weak potion of sorcery, I cast all of my necessary spells and stood my ground for a bit. Together, the scamp and I worked on her health, but her glass warhammer was way too powerful and dropped my health quickly. I worriedly jumped the gun and popped 2 weak potions of healing. Literally right after that, the scamp clutched and clawed her down. This was by far the most difficult match yet, and certainly a reflection of how far I had come. I now received 300 gold for winning my matches, and was slowly approaching the right to challenge Agranac Gromalog. It was at this part in the playthrough where potion restocking really started to play a big part in my spending. I paid a visit to the Gilded Carafe and bought 3 weak potions of sorcery for 216 gold. Owen confirmed my suspicion that this next match was going to be the one I looked forward to the least. This was the 3 Argonian prisoners fight, and honestly, even while playing with characters who are a higher level and have better gear, I still have a bit of trouble with this one. The gates lower and I immediately get swarmed by the 3 fighters. I unfortunately don't have the luxury of getting to focus on one fighter at a time, as they constantly leapt in and fell back after every attack. 2 of them were hand-to-hand fighters while the 3rd wielded a sword. It didn't take long for me to hit my first death whilst on this challenge. Funnily enough, I knew it was going to be here too. Truth be told, I thought I would have died sooner on this run, but I knew this match was going to give me trouble. For the next attempt, I thought it was a good idea to keep them all contained within the walkout tunnel. This way, my scamp could focus on one of them and turn the fight into a 2v2. My health dropped extremely fast though, and after popping some health potions, I was forced to bring the fight back out into the open. This was now the trickiest fight I had to participate in, as I ended up consuming a lot of potions. I thought that by singling out the sword fighter and killing him off, the hand-to-hand fighters wouldn't deal as much damage and I could slow the pace of the match down. I popped my final potion of healing and began to run back and forth across the pit. Out of health potions, the only thing I could do now was take the sorcery ones and sap up all of my magicka, healing my minor wounds. At some point in my desperate attempts to flee, I noticed that one of the Argonians was already dead. It looked like it was the sword fighter too, as the remaining Argonians were holding up their fists. This gave me a huge confidence boost, and I decided to stand my ground and fight. The scamp killed off a second Argonian, and before I knew it, the 3rd was defeated. That was definitely the most difficult fight so far, and I was really hoping that the next few matches would be breezes in comparison. So far, the Summon Scamp spell and Restore Potions have been the MVPs of this run. Returning back to Claudette Peric, I bought 5 more weak potions of sorcery for 360 gold, and 5 more weak potions of healing for 445 gold. It's funny because in my previous playthroughs of this game, potions were never really things that I considered buying. I always came across them either while plundering or as a reward. I bring this up because I never expected that the cost of them would really add up to as much as it did. Owen said that this next match would be simple compared to what I had to deal with before. He was technically right, but in 3 consecutive hits, the Khajiit almost completely drained my health. I was quickly back to popping potions and running around the pit. It seemed like the days of quick battles and lots of savings were long gone. I stood my ground, executing the block and behind strategy when the Khajiit decided to completely heal up. This setback caused me to consume even more potions. In fact, practically all of my health ones were gone at this point. I ran around a little more until finally, the scamp and I managed to stagger him a bit. We took advantage of the opening and pounced on him, defeating the yellow team's warrior combatant. Returning back to the Bloodworks, I figured it was finally time to swap out my current light armor raiment for a new one, as it had taken more than enough damage and I didn't have the means of repairing it. The next fight was an advancement match for the title of Hero, which was 1 stop away from being able to challenge the Grey Prince. For this one, I tried summoning a Dremora again, as I wanted to give it another chance. It helped out in the beginning and lowered the Breton's health by a small amount, but ultimately it just isn't efficient enough for my run. I got my face kicked in right off the bat again and gulped down some sorcery potions. Realizing that it was do or die here, I stopped running and turned around. We traded blows for a bit until the scamp's fireball and my heavy attack collided into the Breton, causing him to die. Payouts were now 350 gold, and I was officially the blue team's hero. Here, I took the time to make one last visit to the Coral Mages Guild. Alberic Lita was selling the defense spell which, when cast, created a shield on the user for 15% for 30 seconds. The spell cost 191 gold, and this was the first time where I pondered if buying a new spell was better use of my gold than buying more potions. Especially in this case, I really had no clue how much of a difference a 15% shield was going to make over a 10% shield. Regardless though, I bought the spell along with Heal Major Wounds, which cost me 263 gold. Ahead of me were the final 3 matches before getting to face off for the title of Grand Champion, ultimately completing my playthrough challenge. The first of the 3 fights was against an ex-member of the Blades. I added my spells to the hotkey wheel and before the gates dropped, cast Defend, Bound Helmet, Bound War Axe, and Summoned Scamp. The Imperial came in hot and drained my health to an incredibly low amount, as per how these fights normally go. I consumed my last weak potion of healing and boosted the rest of my HP via healing spells. Soon, because my magicka was now low, I popped 2 potions of weak sorcery and reset my summons. I thought the scamp would be able to finish the job while I took aggro, and it really seemed like the yellow team hero was going to die, but alas, it despawned and my health once again went down drastically. I healed up and popped my last potion of weak sorcery. Funny enough though, I summoned my scamp, conjured up a dagger, and set myself up in a defensive position just in time for the Daedroth to hit the combatant with a deadly fireball, killing him on the spot. Returning back to my new frequent spot of the Gilded Carafe, I bought up the remaining stock of weak sorcery potions as well as 3 more potions of weak healing. For the second last regular match, I was a little worried because the opponent was fairly resistant to magic. Fortunately, for my case, I don't really cast spells on enemies. Sometimes my scamp may cast a fireball or 2, but for the most part, melee is the main means of damage dealing. I used all of my pre-gate lowering spells and the Altmer came rushing in. To my relief, he was fairly weak with his hits and his health dropped really quickly. In about 13 seconds, the match was over as Marshawn Lynch was back and it felt like the glory days of my challenge run again. Owen paid me out my 300 gold and I knew what was up next. He told me that it was time to face 3 combatants again, the yellow team's champion and their 2 lackeys. For some reason, I wasn't as nervous for this one as I was with the Argonian prisoner fight. I think because I knew Porkchop was going to be sent in with me, and the boar can actually deal a whole lot of damage. This was it, the last regular match before I could challenge the Grey Prince. I lined up outside of the gates with Porkchop and readied my casts. The first attempt at this fight humbled me real quick. It turns out that an archer, spellcaster, and sword fighter make for a pretty challenging combination. Attempt number 2 went much better. Right away, my scamp singled out the archer and killed him in a matter of 15 seconds. Knowing that Porkchop and the scamp weren't as fast as me, my tactic was to kite the remaining 2 combatants into one area and lead them directly into the opposing force of my allies. This worked well in taking care of the spellcaster, and all that was left was the sword fighter. I felt really confident in this moment and stood my ground. Blocking for my life, Porkchop and the scamp ran up behind her and got the jump, killing her, ultimately securing my spot as champion. Owen rewarded me with 500 gold and told me the sweet words that it was time to finally challenge Agranak Gromalog.
Kid, you've got more guts and skill. I think you can take the Great Prince. Go over and talk to Isabel if you think I'm right.
Looking at my inventory, I only had 3 weak potions of sorcery left and 1 weak potion of healing. Since potions win fights, I figured might as well forego any more spending on spells and just stock up as much as possible on consumables. It was really nice to see that I had a system that worked quite well for my needs. Going into this challenge, I thought the more powerful, demanding conjuration spells were going to be what got me through it. It turns out, the novice spells and lots of restoration via magicka and potions are what did the trick. I bought out the rest of Claudette Perrick's stock of weak potions, and then went to all things alchemical in Skingrad.
By the way, do you happen to know what the fine is here in Cyrodiil for necrophilia? Just asking.
Falanu actually offered better prices on the same items. Using the rest of my 538 gold, I bought 7 weak potions of sorcery for 455 septims.
Let's assume... no. That's nothing compared to Morrowind, thanks.
Returning back to the arena, I waited until morning, and then, as per instruction, spoke with Isabel Andronicus. Through her, I challenged the Grey Prince, who gave me no option of completing his little side quest. He of course accepted, and I returned back to Isabel. She gassed up Aggernack, calling him the best level 10 warrior the world's ever seen, and asked me to pick an arena name. I thought the Tamriel Terror rung pretty nicely, and before I knew it, I was onto the home stretch of my level 1 Conjuror challenge. So far, things were going according to plan. No console commands, I only used my arena earnings to buy spells and potions, I remained at level 1, and the difficulty slider was never touched. The only thing I had lost track of was spell use within the arena. There might have been a time where I used both heal minor and major wounds in one match, which I said I wasn't going to do, but I don't think it's grounds for disqualifying me and rendering this whole run null and void. It was finally time to exit the Bloodworks and line up outside the gates one final time. Going into the battle, I wasn't too worried or nervous for it, believe it or not. Sure, he out-leveled me by 9, but I think the fact that he was just one person, combined with all of the potions I had on me, I felt ready for anything. The gates dropped and Aggernack came rushing in. You could certainly tell the difference in his difficulty when it came to his health depleting. His heavy attacks dealt a lot of damage while his lighter ones were a little more manageable. Of course, I had to run the old reliable figure 8 pattern while resetting my summons and regenerating my health. The vast number of potions I had didn't last very long either. I still had the Poison of Illness bottle on me from the tutorial area, so I decided to get in a cheap shot at Aggernack, although it hardly seemed to do anything. I continued my running patterns, occasionally stopping to allow my scamp to get some hits in, and then resuming to heal myself. His health was slowly making its way downwards. I was praying the entire time that he wouldn't pop a health potion, otherwise this fight was going to quickly come to an end for me. In a final stand type of moment, I drank a potion of sorcery, and the scamp and I acted like Bucky and Steve Rogers in Captain America Civil War, who went hit for hit, dealing some serious blows to him. The rush quickly ended though when my axe despawned and Aggernack got his footing back. I drank 1 more health potion and 2 more sorcery ones, wondering how much longer I would hold out for, when, all of a sudden, the 5-time Pro Bowler himself, Marshawn Lynch, returned for his final appearance, dropping that shoulder and securing my victory.
I say again.
And just like that, it was all over. My first Oblivion challenge run of completing the arena faction while using a level 1 Conjuror came to an end. To be honest, I had little doubts in the success factor of doing this playthrough. While there was certainly an element of difficulty to it, I also knew that it wasn't going to be like playing Dark Souls. I purposefully designed it so there would be a challenge and learning curve to it, but I could also have fun while doing it. It really helped me develop a bigger appreciation for the conjuration and even mysticism schools of magic. As mentioned prior, the real MVPs for this one were the Summon Scamp spell as well as restoration spells and consumables. Without the potions, there's no way I would have gotten as far as I did. I felt as though having the restrictions of only being able to buy new potions and spells via my arena earnings was a fair and honest way of doing things. Perhaps next time, if I were to do a challenge like this in the same sort of format and setting, I could limit the number of potions used per match as to increase the difficulty a bit. But again, for me personally, it felt like the difficulty was perfectly aligned in between challenging and fun. The novice spells were really what carried me through this experience, as the journeyman ones were far too magicka hungry for a level 1 character. My biggest weakness was definitely the inability to properly defend myself. With no proper training in armor and a weapon that despawned every 15 seconds, it was certainly difficult to gain offensive momentum. My biggest strength was conjuring up weapons and creatures. There's certainly a good reason why conjurers and necromancers run away from you when you get too close to them in ruins, caves, and forts. The best they can do is summon a Daedroth and slowly chip away at your health with a bound dagger. So, to answer the question, can a level 1 conjurer become Grand Champion of the arena? Yes, they can. It just requires a running back of a scamp and a lot of potions. As mentioned in the beginning, I'd love to do this again. Feel free to leave suggestions below on what faction/questline you'd like to see and with what type of character. Until next time, keep on adventuring. In today's video, I'm going to be embarking on another challenge playthrough in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. As per some recommendations, this week's run is attempting to finish the Fighters Guild questline whilst roleplaying as a beggar. This video isn't intended to be a recount of the storyline, even though it inherently has those elements, but more so a play-by-play into the build itself. The Beggars of Oblivion, in my opinion, are some of the most iconic NPCs within the game. Their dialogue, names, and involvement within the Thieves Guild questline certainly have given them a permanent, rent-free space in my mind. In order to accurately play as a beggar, I looked into their NPC class as well as specific characteristics. All beggars within Oblivion are the commoner class. This means that their major skills include armor, blunt, hand-to-hand, alchemy, acrobatics, mercantile, and speechcraft. Their specialization is in stealth, and their preferred attributes are personality and endurance. Now though, the catch with beggars is that they don't carry much in their inventory, only wear lower class clothing, live in poverty, and fight only with their fists. These are the skills and preferences that need to get me through this combat-heavy storyline. Another special little quirk about beggars is that all of them are infected with at least one disease. So, I appropriately decided to give my character, Mucus, the disease of brain rot. This condition must remain on my character until the end of the questline. Some additional notes before beginning: I'm choosing to stay at level 1 for this playthrough. In certain instances, this renders the playthrough to be more challenging, and in others, less challenging. As well, given my character's build, I won't be needing to use any items that scale to my level. It feels like playing the game like this will blend the worlds of both fun and challenging. In the way of looting, buying, selling, acquiring gold, etc., I can only use my Fighters Guild payouts and any septums I've acquired directly from looting fallen foes and searching containers whilst out on the job. The same goes for health potions if they're found while out on contracts. The difficulty slider can't be adjusted, non-storyline essential followers cannot be used, no usage of magicka other than greater powers from birth signs, and lastly, no console commands. At the end, I'll give my overall thoughts on this build. Again, please let me know which builds and which questline or faction you'd like to see them in next, and currently on the screen are a list of them lined up. Without further ado, it's time to start the Oblivion challenge run-through of the Fighters Guild questline while playing as a beggar. The adventure begins in the city of Anvil. Entering inside of the Fighters Guild Hall, I spoke with Azan about enlisting. Something I've always liked about the Fighters Guild is that they allow anybody to join and there's no trial run or prerequisite that needs to be taken care of. Azan gave me the contract of a rat problem. I left the guild and made my way into Arvena Thalos' house. Speaking with her, she was hysterical about her pet rats being killed by some unknown creature in the basement. Heading down there myself, I began to battle the mountain lion. I got a few cheap heavy shots in whilst it was focused on killing the rats. Eventually, it turned its attention on me and started giving me the claws. It didn't take too long though for a rat to finish it off. Late game mountain lions can certainly prove to be a lot of trouble, so I was semi-worried to face it, but everything worked out in the end. Returning back to Arvena, she then asked me to locate Panaris and get to the bottom of where the lions were coming from. Doing so, together, the experienced hunter and I wandered outside of the city walls and eventually came across their den. Normally at this part, I'm charging in, weapon in hand, taking hits and dealing equal amounts of damage, but this time, I laid back and let Panaris take the heat. He certainly did a way better job than I would have done, as after a few swings with his sword, one would drop dead. Luckily, the attention stayed on the hunter, and I was able to leap in from behind and get a few cheap shots in with my fist. This plan worked perfectly, and before I knew it, all of them were dead. Panaris gave me the go-ahead to leave, and I returned back to Arvena. She again was hysterical about another mountain lion in her basement, which led me going back down there to take care of it. This one-on-one fight certainly gave me a little more trouble. One of the common issues I would face with just using my fists was a reach problem. Either I would need to back up because of a lack of defensive skills, or the enemy would lunge in and lunge out, rendering my attacks ineffective. Soon, the last mountain lion was defeated, but I got a sweet taste of things to come with my health getting down below half. The rest of the quest was pretty standard. Arvena asked me to look into her neighbor, Quill Weave, who might have been behind it. Doing so, I witnessed her putting meat by a hole in the wall of Arvena's backyard. Confronting her, she came clean and admitted to doing the act. I was then faced with choosing to side with Quillweave for a boost in my mercantile skill, or with Arvena for a boost in my speechcraft. Both could have been useful for this playthrough, but ultimately, I decided to go with Arvena's reward. She was also the one to pay me out 100 gold for this successful contract, and just like that, the first Fighters Guild quest as a beggar was down. To be honest, I knew that regardless of whichever class or playstyle I was going for, the first few quests of any faction were going to be a breeze. There's a reason after all that they're the first set of quests a player can do. Returning back to Azan, he promoted me to the rank of apprentice and then gave me my second contract. This was the quest of the unfortunate shopkeeper and involved break-ins at Lel's Quality Merchandise out on the waterfront. Going to Norbert's shop, he gives the usual speech that the break-ins always happen at night and that somehow they don't forcefully enter inside, even with new locks. He leaves and I spotted a detail I've never noticed before. After getting to this stage in the quest, the bandits that break in just sort of awkwardly stand outside of the shop until nightfall. I found it to be quite funny actually, and definitely thought that when Norbert passed by them, he should have recognized them immediately. Heading on inside of the shop and waiting until nightfall, I sort of forgot how the AI programming worked for this one. I didn't want to take on all three men at the same time, as I knew that unbalanced fights were something my beggar character couldn't handle. So, upon hiding and not seeing them at all, I crept forward a bit. Real quick, the aggro came, so I ran outside. Fortunately, it was only one of the bandits chasing after me, so I was able to stand my ground and fight. Ainveer the Wood Elf wasn't so difficult to face. I just battered him down with my fists repeatedly, and soon enough he was dead. Going back inside of the shop, I aggroed the remaining two bandits and then ran out into the Gold Coast again. Upon turning the corner of the shop, I had lost both of the attackers somehow. Wandering along the docks, I noticed that the Nord, Storn the Burly, was fighting against the guard, and he was slain practically right away. The Dark Elf though stood behind the shop waiting for my return. Getting in close, the fight began and he fought using an Iron Claymore. Honestly, I was more worried about mass damage than DPS when it came to battling against enemies. He fought well, but in the end, the same guard who killed Storn fired off a cheap shot, dealing the killing blow. Going back inside of Lel's Quality Merchandise, I debated stealing some stuff from the shop, but figured that kind of crossed into a burglar/rogue type of playthrough. I entered inside of the Flowing Bowl and informed Norbert that the break-ins were dealt with once and for all. It always makes me chuckle when he comes to the realization that all of these men once worked for him. He pays me out my 100 gold, and I move on from Anvil. Again, so far so good with this build. Arriving in Shadenhall, I speak with Burz Grokash. He gives me the Desolate Mine contract, and I'm to bring a shipment of weapons to some fighters within a cave. After a short walk north, I arrive outside of the mine and face off against two goblins guarding the entrance. Thankfully, they don't hit hard at all, and both take very few hits to kill. I enter inside and hand over the weapons to my fellow guildmates. I've always liked hearing the reactions of the High Elf and Orc when they get the weapons they didn't want. Together, the four of us charged through the mine, and I tried to lay back in order to let them deal with the majority of the enemies. That plan quickly went out the window though, as the first goblin I saw aggroed onto me, and my companions continued onwards. I checked the pockets of the dead miners in order to see if they had gold on them, but sadly, they didn't. I continued through the mine, losing sight of my allies, and getting aggroed onto by more goblins. Again though, my safety in here was never really an issue, especially if I got overwhelmed, as the goblins were pretty weak. I discovered quickly that my fighting preference involved mostly heavy attacks. I liked the satisfying hard punches, and in my mind, it felt like I was able to kill quicker. Going around the mine, I found some lootable chests that had pocket change in them. It didn't seem like much now, but I figured it was certainly going to add up over time. Before I knew it, I got the journal update that all of the goblins were dead, and I could now return to Burz. Doing so, I got paid out 100 gold, which felt low, especially considering it included some sort of bonus for keeping everyone alive. He promoted me to the rank of journeyman and told me that Velena Danton and Coral wanted to see me. Heading over to Coral, I went inside of the guild hall and spoke with Velena. She then directed me to Modron Orain, who gave me the contract of unfinished business. I was to go and seek out someone named Maglir in Skingrad, as he defaulted on a contract. Whilst in the Westweald, I paid a visit to my favorite shopkeeper and bought out some of her weak healing potions. Something I never really bother with, but decided to utilize for this playthrough was the haggle feature. I cranked up the bar and managed to get some good deals on the potions. Seeking out Maglir, I met with the insufferable Bosmer, and he told me about the contract to find Brennus Astus' journal out in Fallen Rock Cave. Taking matters into my own hands, I made my way northwest until I arrived outside of the cavern entrance. To be honest, I couldn't remember what I'd be dealing with on the inside. It didn't take long though for the reminder to come through. Facing off against mostly skeletons, they weren't too difficult to defeat either, although they fought with weapons and took a few more hits to kill than the goblins did. So far at this point, I think the unfortunate shopkeeper should have been the trickiest quest to deal with, but due to it taking place in a city, there was a really easy workaround for the fight. Along the way to the journal, I continued to loot the chests of any gold present. Eventually, I got in a little bit of hot water when I aggroed onto 2 skeletons at a time. I beat down the first one pretty good, but by the time I had to face the second one, my health was creeping towards an alarming amount. I popped my first bit of health potions and proceeded onto my next 2v1. This interaction went a whole lot smoother, and I think it was because one of the skeletons was an archer. Just beyond them was the room in which held Astus' journal. I killed the guards inside, took it, and worked my way back out of here, looting what I could along the way. I was faced with the choice of covering for Maglir or throwing him under the bus. I usually toss him to the wolves because he sucks, but this time I wanted to see how he could have been of benefit to me down the line. So I told Orain that he didn't default and I got paid out my usual sum. Right away, Orain offered me my next contract. The Drunken Disorderly quest brought me over to the city of Leowin and ultimately into the Five Claws Lodge. Speaking with the peeved Vantis, he told me that the Blackwood Company has taken all of the work, so with nothing to do in the meantime, they've resorted to getting blasted. Attempting to find them work, Witse Dutse informs me that someone named Margart might have a job for them. Seeking her out, she tells me that she has something for the guild to do, but first, we need to prove our worth to her. She asks me to bring her 5 samples of ectoplasm. This might have been one of the tasks I was looking forward to the least. As a poorly skilled hand-to-hand beggar, I don't really do any damage to spirits and can't afford to buy the ectoplasm. I thought for a bit on what I could do, and then it came to me. Varule from the Ghost Ship of Anvil side quest was about to become my best friend. She gave me the key to the Serpent's Wake, and I got to work. Entering inside, I got aggroed onto by 2 wraiths, and then ran back out to the Gold Coast. Varule did her best to fight against the specters, but ended up falling off the dock into the water below. I continued to drag the ghosts through the boardwalk where a couple of NPCs came to my aid. Most of them were unable to deal damage though, until finally a guard stepped in and started to put the work in. One wraith flew off to who knows where, and the other remained on the boardwalk. The first wraith was defeated, and I tried to find the second one. I thought it entered inside of the city, but couldn't locate it anywhere. Returning back to the docks, the wraith turned up to be right in front of the gates, and the fight resumed. This time, Valerie was reset back onto the boardwalk, and she came rushing in with shock magic. The second ghost was defeated, and I repeated the process all over again. Dragging 2 more wraiths out from the ship, this time the town's defenses brought the fight to them, but it sort of backfired. Both Valerie and the guard ended up falling down into the sea below. This caused the specters to get stuck in a movement animation, tracking their foes in the water. At one point, one of them managed to take the plunge below and got killed for it, but the fourth was stun-locked for quite some time. Finally, the old saying, "the enemy of my enemy is my friend," came to fruition, and a sleeper agent for the Mythic Dawn came to finish the job for me. I found the last wraith, dragged it out from the depths of the boat, and the townsfolk came to my aid one final time. Again, I was really lucky that this specific quest was held in a city, or else I would have had to come up with a whole different plan. 5 samples of ectoplasm in hand, I brought them to Margart and Leowin, and then told Vantis and his men that they now had work. Returning back to Orain, I informed him of the Blackwood Company, got paid out my 100 gold, and was promoted to the rank of swordsman. So far, so good with this build. I knew though that there wasn't much of a future with it, and eventually I'd hit a hard roadblock. With no leveling, no way to progressively use my skills, and no way to upgrade my defenses, my timer was ticking. Returning to Azan in Anvil, he gave me my next contract, a Den of Thieves. He told me the awesome news that I'd be working with my friend Maglir, and together, the two of us asked around for information. Rano told us to speak with Newheim the Portly, and Newheim spilled the beans. He told us that it's a group of Bosmer, and that they're held up in the nearby Hirota cave. Whilst in there, we should be on the lookout for his flagon. Maglir and I traveled the road north out of the city, until finally we arrived at the cave. The first route we took whilst inside led us to a false wall. Behind it were some of the Bosmer that we needed to hunt down. Maglir and the bandits got themselves into a stalemate as they both aggroed onto one another and decided the fastest way to reach each other was through the wall. This continued for quite some time until someone from the other side lowered the false wall. We fought against an archer and a spellcaster. The archer shot Maglir with some sort of demoralized arrow, and that left me alone to fight. I beat down the spellcaster quickly and moved on to the archer. She was a slippery one, as she would keep on her toes and move around a lot. Eventually, Maglir regained his courage and dealt the killing blow. We moved along further into Hirota Cave and got ourselves in a hairy situation. There were 3 Bosmer in one of the rooms, and altogether, they proved to be a bit of a problem. I took on one of them, Maglir the other, and the third ran away after conjuring up a zombie. My health was low, but I defeated my opponent and went after the zombie Conjuror. Maglir went down, and I readied myself for the 2v1. Fortunately, it never came, and I was able to beat down the second opponent. My health got scary low, I drank my last potion, Maglir went down again, and I was fighting against a pantless archer. Luckily, he took forever to knock his arrow, and I was able to get up in his face and utilize my DPS. Thrangerfin was dead, and I was able to rest up. The next room we went into contained 2 archers, standing over a common area of sorts. I stood atop a makeshift bridge, fighting one of them when all of a sudden it collapsed. In a beautiful motion, Maglir was waiting for us underneath, and we struck the bandit down together. I soloed the other archer, and the final Bosmer was waiting for us in a separate room. Maglir and I charged in at her together, and she didn't prove to be much of an issue. Once all was said and done, I went and retrieved Newheim's flagon. Returning back to Anvil, I handed the cup over to Newheim in exchange for 3 bottles of his special brew. Then, I went over to Azan back at the guild, he paid me out my 100 gold, and sent me back over to Burz. Before going to Shadenhall, I paid a visit to Falanu and bought some more health potions with my earnings and findings. Unfortunately, even though I was only level 1, it felt like what I could afford in exchange for how much it would heal me wasn't really cutting it. I could easily blow through 3 bottles in one fight, which equated to 2 quests worth of gold. Making my way to the Shadenhall Fighters Guild, Burz gave me my next contract, Emelian's Debt. I set out to the Water's Edge settlement north of Leeuwin and spoke with Bien Emelian. She informed me of her father's gambling debt and said that the best way to pay it off was by retrieving her grandfather's sword and armor in their family tomb. I traveled to the Emelian family crypt east of Water's Edge and lined up outside of the tomb. I couldn't remember the types of enemies I'd be facing in here, thinking that they could be ghosts. I decided that for this quest, I'd utilize the other benefits of being a beggar, the ability to run and hide. I charged into the tomb and got my legs in motion. It was mostly undead in here, which I totally could have taken on, but I decided to just commit by keeping my head down and legs moving. I didn't know my way through the tomb, so quite a few times I found myself lost or in a dead end of some kind. The more I ran through this dungeon, the more I was happy to have skipped past all of these fights. I kept moving and found myself in a second zone called the Sarcophagus Chamber. This place was filled with a lot more undead, and they were at every turn. Soon, I found myself in the crypt containing Brusef Emelian's cuirass and sword. I was crossing my fingers that there was a second way out of here, as I was going to have a lot of problems backtracking through the tomb otherwise. Thankfully, there was a path that led me back to the first zone. Through a hole in the ground, I dropped down right in front of the exit and swam my way back to Water's Edge. Handing the relics back to Bien, I traveled back to Burz in Shadenhall and he paid me out. I was then promoted to the rank of Protector and sent off to Modron. Completing the quest this way felt kind of thrilling. It was exciting being chased and knowing that if I messed up, I would get cornered and slain. It was also good to know that if I needed to utilize this method again, it wasn't that hard to do. Or so I thought. Traveling back to Coral and meeting with Orain, he gave me an off-the-record private contract. For this quest, titled The Master's Son, I'm to accompany Varanus Danton, Velena's son, to Non-Will Cave in search of someone named Galtus Previa. Valenia helicopters Varanus, and Modron fears he isn't living up to his full potential. Leaving the hall, I went to collect Varanus, and together, we traveled along the road north to Non-Will Cave. This was also a quest I was really nervous for. I knew that this cavern contained trolls, and I wasn't sure how much damage they would deal to me, or vice versa. Entering inside, Varanus charged off, sword in hand, aggroed onto something who knows where. I followed him, and soon enough, we ran into 2 savage trolls. Varanus ran right past them, and I was left to 2v1 them. I was really surprised to see though that I was able to take their health down in big chunks with each heavy hit. However, the same went for them towards me. Varanus had an easy time fighting them off with his steel set. Upon entering into the next zone though, I encountered the real problem within Non-Will Cave. The trolls may have been a not so bad fight, but the ogres were outright brutes. They hit me incredibly hard and my fists could barely keep me in the fight. 3 hits by one ogre and I was already almost dead. I popped some health potions and Varanus came to his senses. I held down aggro while he dealt damage, and soon we were ready to move on. Fortunately, those seemed like the only ogres that we needed to face, as the next area only contained 3 savage trolls. It felt nice that I was able to beat them down with 2 or so heavy attacks. Varanus and I cleared the space, fought against 1 more troll, and then located the body of Galtus Previa. I always loved the detail of the broken Blackwood Company shield by his body. The foreshadowing and build-up for the Fighters Guild never ceases to amaze me. With Galtus' condition verified, I fled the cave with Varanus and returned back to Modron and Coral. Every quest that gives me a follower during the storyline sends a breath of relief through me. It's always nice to know that I can rely on them to deal most of the damage. Modron gives me a dagger for my efforts and sends me off to find Maglir again as he's defaulted on another contract. I wasn't sure how to navigate the usage of items that were handed to me as rewards. On one hand, they were acquired through rule-abiding means. On the other though, it doesn't really fit the profile of a beggar. So ultimately, if the reward wasn't a consumable or gift, I decided against using it. The quests were certainly ramping up from here. The past few proved to have their difficulties, and as mentioned before, the potions were a very temporary solution to getting through these contracts. Arriving in Breville, I went to the Lonely Suitor Lodge and located the Little Fetcher. I hold hard feelings against Maglir because all my character has done is cover for him and make his life easier. In return, he acts rude and patronizing towards the player. Anyways, Maglir says that he's with the Blackwood Company now and that he won't be doing the contract. Because I covered for him out in Skingrad though, he fills me in on who the contract is for. Heading over to the Mages Guild, I spoke with Aryari who informed me she's waiting on the 10 samples of Imp Gall that the Fighters Guild promised to deliver. She points me over to Robber's Glen Cave and I make my way over there. Along the way, I run into a bandit on the road and honestly, as sad as it is, he alone gives me a run for my money. The fight comes down to the wire and luckily, I'm the one to deliver the killing blow. This interaction though really showed me just how awful this build would continue to get if I progressed in levels. Entering inside of the cave, this was honestly one of the easier quests that I've had in a while. Obviously the magic that the imps cast counters my close range fist attacks. However, as soon as I closed the distance, their little feet attacks didn't really cause me much harm. As per usual, I looted as much gold as I could. Even against these weaker imps, battling more than one proved to be a little bit difficult, as my player had no way of handling the situation or the ability to adequately restore health. Before I knew it, I had collected all 10 samples of the Imp Gall and could return back to Aryari at the Mages Guild. She gave me a base Ring of Aegis as a bonus, which, again, I was sad that I couldn't use, but ultimately felt justified in not doing so. Orain rewarded me with my 100 gold payout and then promoted me to the rank of Defender. He immediately got into the next contract, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, this was one that I knew would likely prove to be a lot of trouble. As a level 10 warrior, the fight with Azani was really challenging to say the least, so I couldn't imagine what it was going to be like as a level 1 beggar. I met with Orain at his house after dark, and he filled me in on the whole Azani Blackheart debacle, a potential setup regarding the elusive warlord and the Blackwood Company. I fast traveled over to Leowin and met with Modron at the Guildhall there. Then together, we traveled to the alien ruin of Arpenia, where the contract involving Azani and the Blackwood Company supposedly took place. I remember in my original video of playing through this questline, Arpenia confused me a lot as I spent a long time looking around the ruins in search of Azani. I expected a quest update or for Orain to tell me some vital information, but none of that came. I was just running around aimlessly, believing there to be something that I missed in here. Even for this challenge run, after defeating all of the nuisance critters and exploring every inch of the local map, it took Modron a while to actually have his dialogue triggered. I had forgotten the trek to the next ruin of Adatar was a slow and miserable one. Outside of Arpenia, we encountered some bandits, and learning my lesson from last time, I let Modron do all of the fighting. Together, we trudged along until finally we entered inside of the ruin. Here I took point, but let Modron do all of the dirty work. I was actually able to deal decent amounts of damage to the bandits, but Orain killed them in 1 or 2 blows, and for some reason, they'd aggro onto him most of the time instead of me. This continued for quite a while, and to be honest, it made my time going through Adatar incredibly easy. Soon though, we entered into the zone that contained Azani Blackheart. I laid eyes on him and began to sneak around in the dark. I wondered if we'd be able to get a good sneak attack in as the first strike, but ultimately, Modron blew our cover. In one swift heavy attack with Sinweaver, Azani crushed my health down to below a quarter left. I was sweating hard here and gulped down a ton of health potions. Modron and Azani were mainly duking it out while I got in there to throw around some sucker punches. I barely did any damage to him, and even Orain was having trouble getting some good hits in. I knew that if Modron went unconscious, that was it and I'd die shortly after. We continued to press the attack, my fingers crossed for Modron's health, and soon after, he dealt the killing blow. I took Azani's ring for Orain as proof that the Fighters Guild completed this mission. There were no rewards for this one, so I'm assuming Azani's gear was meant to be rewarding enough. Orain promoted me to the rank of Warder, and it felt like I hit a big milestone in this challenge playthrough. Continuing onwards with the questline, I returned to Burrs and Shadenhall, who gave me the contract of the fugitives. I fast traveled down to the city of Breville and learned of the location housing the escaped criminals. Bloodmane Cave was a short distance away from the city. I knew for this one that there were only 4 enemies to fight. What I couldn't remember though was how tough they'd be. I tracked down the first one, who was a Nord named Hlofgar, and he fought with a mason shield. This was the first time I tested out using a greater power against an enemy. I cast Star of the West on him, which absorbed his fatigue by 100 points. Even after using it though, the fight was still incredibly close. We went hit for hit, and by the time I was done with him, he had my health down to about a quarter. The next fugitive I came across was a red guard named Ashanta. She fought with a longsword and a shield, really controlling the fight with her reach. It ultimately ended the same way as the previous one, with my remaining health being below a quarter. I was honestly really thankful that none of them were side by side, or that would have been impossible to deal with. The 3rd and 4th fugitives were located in the next zone. Dreetley, an Argonian archer, was the next matchup. Thankfully, he took forever to let loose his arrows, and I was able to get up in his face and beat him to a pulp. The fight ended and I was pretty much unscathed. The last fight was honestly such a strange one though. I found and started to wail on Enrion. He cast Chameleon and summoned Zombie, then proceeded to run away. Enrion ran through the entirety of the 2nd zone. He was just as fast as I was, so it was difficult to keep up with his sharp turns and movement patterns. At one point, I tried to cut him off in the tunnels, but that ended up being a mistake in of itself. He cast some powerful destruction magic on me, and the zombie dealt some pretty heavy blows to my health. I drank up on potions, and then Enrion resumed his marathon around Bloodmane Cave. Wondering how long this was going to last for, I remembered looting some bottles of skooma in a previous dungeon. Sculling some moon sugar down felt pretty spot on for the Beggar build, so I drank all 3 bottles and started flying across the cavern. Before I knew it, Enrion was dead and I was free to leave the cave. These quests were most definitely getting trickier, and I honestly started to get nervous for a few of them that were coming up. Returning back to Burrs and Shadenhall, he paid me out my 100 gold. Traveling to Anvil, I spoke with Azan, who gave me the contract of the Wandering Scholar. Something I've always been fascinated with for this quest is the journal entry that's associated with it. It tells the player that Brittle Rock Cave is located northeast of Such. Since it doesn't make the distinction between Fort Such and the removed city of Such, I've always assumed it to be referencing the latter, a lost piece of the game's history, if you will. Along the way to the cave, I was attacked by a wolf and contracted the disease of Helljoint. This disease drains both agility and speed for 5 points, both very important attributes for my character's build. But since I can't cure one disease without curing all of them, I decided to take on the increased challenge. Arriving at the cave, I entered inside and spoke with Alante, who was looking to quote-unquote study a lost Daedric shrine. I knew what kinds of enemies I'd be facing down here, and to be honest, I thought they'd be some of the easiest ones yet. Unfortunately, that couldn't be further from the truth. These stunted scamps were able to withstand my fists fairly easily, and they were draining my health no problem. Their fire magic and Marshawn Lynch shoulder tackles had me really nervous. I kicked myself a bit for not replenishing my potions beforehand, as I only had 2 left. I killed the first stunted scamp and drank my last health potion. I attempted to take on the second one, but quickly ended that endeavor when it started to beat me down. I brought the scamp all the way back to Alante, and thankfully she aggroed onto it. I was 1 hit away, ready to accept my fate, when my Altmer companion shot down the attacker with a fireball. I rested for an hour, but noted that I had to be really cautious going forward. Allowing Alante to lead the way, I had to be really careful, as while she was certainly a lot more equipped than I was to handle the situation here, if she died, I'd have to restart this whole process over again. A technique that worked really well, as with most of these follower-based quests, involved me holding aggro and her dealing the damage. For one of the areas, it almost seemed like Alante could go past the scamps unnoticed, and if I stayed out of sight, close enough to her, we maybe could have snuck past all of the enemies. Ultimately though, it didn't work out and I never got to test my theory again. At this point too, most of the scamps we fought were bunched up into pairs, so I tried my best to be strategic and smart with the fighting, preserving Alante's life just a little bit further. Finally, the 2 of us made it to the chamber with the destroyed statue of Molag Bal. We took out the final 2 scamps, me battering them with my fists, and Alante swinging away with her conjured weapon. She told me that this was far enough, thanked me for the escort, and rewarded me with a book. Exiting the way I came in and returning back to Azan in Anvil, he paid me out my earnings and promoted me to the rank of Guardian. Honestly, it was after this quest where the contracts really started to take a turn for the worst. Before progressing onwards, I took a quick pit stop in Skingrad in order to restock on health potions. I had a good bit of gold at this point and managed to buy around 12 of them. Traveling back to Coral Guildhall, Modron informs me that Varanus Daunton was sent on a mission to Forsaken Mine and has yet to return. He asks me to look into it. I make my way over there and enter inside. Within the first section, there are a lot of dead bodies and nuisance critters lingering around them. There's obvious evidence of some battle, and you can even see a Blackwood Company mercenary amongst the carnage. Progressing further into the cave, I came across my first savage troll. These ones were built like those up at Nonwell Cavern, and it took me only a few heavy punches to kill them. The issue was that this time I didn't have any help. The Lost Passages portion was the next zone into the mine. There were more trolls here, and now they were starting to group up together. The more I swung away with my fists and the more my fatigue lowered, the longer the battles took. At one point, I was able to successfully sneak past one troll, but immediately ran into another one in one of the tunnels. The fight was pretty close, and if I had aggroed the other troll just behind me, I likely would have received my first death. Just a little further ahead through more tunnels and even more trolls, I located the body of Varanus Daunton. Taking his journal, I left the way I had came in through this cave, unfortunately catching the attention of the troll I originally snuck past. I beat it down, exited Forsaken Mine, and traveled back to Orain in Coral. He was very displeased to hear about Varanus' death and said that the 2 of us should lay low. He tells me I should go out and complete more guild-officiated contracts in the meantime. I return to Azan in Anvil and ask him for more work. He informs me though that because of mine and Modron's little side adventures, resulting in the death of Elena's son, Orain's been expelled and I've been demoted back down to Defender. As for contracts, Azan sends me off to seek someone named Sirach in Bruma regarding a relic called Saint Alicia Stone. Doing so, Sirach informs me that this stone was stolen from the chapel not long ago by a group of bandits. Following the compass, it leads me out through the eastern gate and a bit beyond the road. Standing alone just off the pathway, I run into one of the bandits who informs me that his group no longer has the stone and that everybody but him was killed off by ogres. The ogres took the stone to a not so nearby alien ruin called Sedor. For some reason, I thought it would be a faster route to travel over to Forsaken Mine and work my way north from there. What I didn't account for was the uphill journey, which really ended up killing a lot of time. Eventually though, I made it to Sedor and entered inside. At first, I was thinking of trying to sneak my way past the ogres. I thought it would be a new and fun way to complete the contract. That all went down the drain though when they spotted me right away, resulting in my first death. There was no way I was going to win a fight against any of them, so I decided to use the old tried and true technique of legging it past them and dodging their attacks. This came with the same sort of issues that the Emelian tomb came with, as I didn't know my way around this place, and every dead end or unsure decision led to me getting manhandled by an ogre. Eventually, I found myself ascending up some stairs, and it unlocked a core memory of a push block and jumping down. Doing so, I retrieved the amulet and attempted to make a beeline for the exit. Unfortunately, the two ogres I first encountered were still guarding the way out of this little nook. So I let them come into the room with me where I broke their ankles and then continued on for the exit. Oddly enough, there was a third ogre blocking me from leaving, and this was one I had never seen before. I couldn't get past it, so I hurried into the previous big room and prayed that the other two ogres wouldn't sneak up from behind me. Luckily, this plan worked, and I was able to finally exit Sedor and made it a safe distance away for fast travel. I handed the relic back to Sirach in Bruma, and he gifted me with probably the best reward yet: 3 strong potions of healing. Returning back to Azan, he paid me out my sum of 100 gold, and that was it for contracts coming from him. I fast traveled over to Shaden Hall and spoke with Burz Grokash about my next contract. He assigned me with the Noble's Daughter quest, and I made my way for Lord Rugdump's estate. This was one of the few quests that I truly had no idea how I was going to handle. I knew that I'd be forced to fight and kill at least 3 ogres on my own. Not an impossible task, but so far it's proved to be not very easy either. Making it to Rugdump Manor and entering inside, the Lord informed me of the situation at hand, his missing daughter and the aggressive ogres. As a side note, Rugdump's dialogue might be some of the funniest and best written within the whole game. The whole trope of an orc trying their best to act overly posh and noble-like is amazing. I exited the estate and made my way over to the quest marker. Immediately, I spotted the ogres, and in some sixth sense fashion, they spotted me. I had a few ways in which I wanted to try and handle this. Pulling 2 of them over, I brought them to Rugdump's land and they got stuck on the fence line. I tried to leap in and land some cheap hits, but every time I got close, I would get clobbered. Eventually, the ogres made it through the fence and I tried my second idea. I went inside of the Lord's estate and pulled Rugdump into the fight. It looked like he readied himself against the ogre, but after taking some damage, he tried to flee in fear. The ogre slapped him into oblivion, rendering him unconscious, and this was when I decided to try my third and cheekiest idea. I reverted my last save and this time pulled the attention of all 3 ogres. With the 3 brutes following me, my plan was to bring them all to the city of Shaden Hall and enter inside of its walls. The kiting took a very long time. They moved at decent paces, but they would often take weird routes and split off from one another. Given how long this was going to take, I didn't want to have to repeat this process twice if one of them got left behind. At one point, they got stuck in a running animation on a cliffside, and one of them refused to follow me down any further. After quite some time, it finally resumed the chase with its friends, and we continued towards the city. Nearing the gate, I attracted the attention of a wolf, a bandit, and a rat. With 6 assailants chasing me, my game started to freak out and freeze a whole lot. I knew this was a bad sign, and as soon as I entered inside of the city, where the guards took down only one of the ogres and exited back out, my game crashed. Fortunately, my save wasn't so long ago, but I still had to repeat a third of the trek. Making it back to Shaden Hall this time with only the 3 ogres on my tail, one by one they entered into the city with me, and the guards took them out. As soon as the third one was killed, I was able to reach Lady Rogbutt in the rolling hills near the estate and escort her back to the manor. The Lord rewarded me with his sword, and upon returning back to Burrs, he paid me out 100 gold and restored my rank of Guardian. For the last regular contract within the Fighters Guild, Burrs asked me to look into some disappearances at the settlement of Harlan's Watch. Venturing out just south of the city, Jorana Thalis filled me in on the phenomenon that's been happening. Residents have been seeing strange lights near Swampy Cave, they go to investigate and are never heard from again. This contract was also one that I had made special mental note for. I knew I was going to be fighting Will-o'-the-Wisps, which I wouldn't be able to do any damage to. On top of that, I knew there were going to be more trolls inside of the cave. I had thought though that this was one quest where I could run in, discover the bodies, and then run back out. Doing so, I legged it through the tunnels, fought off a swamp troll, and made it to the small room with the human remains. This was when I received a disheartening journal update letting me know that I had to clear out the entire cave of trolls. This was going to be tricky now as I had captured the attention of the wisps and had no way of getting them off my tail, or, for that matter, being able to heal myself via resting. Figuring I would just go through the motions and see how it plays out, I moved through the cave and came across more trolls. The swamp trolls were roughly the same stats-wise as the savage trolls. It took 2 or 3 heavy hits to kill them, and probably not too far off from that number for them to kill me. Soon, I experienced a mysterious phenomenon similar to what happened a couple of quests ago. The swamp trolls would engage briefly in combat and then flee, running a marathon around the whole zone. I didn't really know why this was happening, to be honest. My best guess was maybe the Will-o'-the-Wisps were causing them to run away from me, but I couldn't be for certain. Fortunately, I soon moved on to the next zone where all of the trolls that were one punch away from dying were located. Killing them off, I ventured further in and tried to take on a whole group of them. I was out of potions, in too deep, and eventually, my inevitable death happened. This was when I decided I wanted to reset and restock on potions. It was also where I discovered another really strange occurrence. The Will-o'-the-Wisps weren't aggressive towards me. They were following me around, making it impossible to rest and replenish my health, but they weren't attacking me or anything like that. I tried attacking them in the beginning, and I didn't have any console commands active or anything of the sort. Maybe they were just taking pity on a poor old beggar. Deciding to push it to the limit and taking out one more swamp troll, I left the cave and fled back to Harlan's Watch. Oddly enough, the wisps didn't follow me beyond there, and I never saw them again. Buying a couple of health potions from All Things Alchemical and returning back to Swampy Cave, I was actually able to rest in the first zone, so I knew I had something going for me this time round. Making my way back into the second zone, again there was a straggler waiting to get pummeled. I made the rounds, heavy attacking the trolls and slowly getting closer to my goal. I was still pretty thrilled that the trolls weren't too difficult of fights yet. Some of them ran away from me still, and others chose to stay and make my life a bit easier. Finally, I slew the last one and returned back to Jorana. She thanked me for my efforts, and I reported back to Burrs, who paid me out my 100 gold and promoted me to the rank of champion. It was now time for the endgame quests of the Fighters Guild storyline. Returning back to Coral, I popped into Modron's home and he told me of his plan to capture Ajum Kajin of the Blackwood Company at Glade Mist Cave in order to interrogate him. I was always disappointed that Orain didn't accompany the player on this mission. He's expelled from the guild already, so technically he has nothing to lose by tagging along. Of course, other than his life, but something tells me he doesn't value that too much. I bought out one more health potion from Falanu and then made my way over to Glade Mist Cave. Entering inside, I wasn't sure what to expect out of the fighters. It felt like pretty balanced matchups for the most part. They would get my health down by a bit, and I'd have to put in the work to defeat them. I encountered quite a few archers to begin with. I never minded fighting them though, as their slowness in letting off their arrows made it easy to charge in and pummel them. Eventually though, I did get into a hairy situation in where I accidentally aggroed onto 3 melee fighters at once. Thinking I was clever in getting a sneak attack in, it turned out to only attract the attention of the other 2 mercenaries whom were apparently really close by. I thought the best course of action was to hold them at a choke point on a natural bridge I had just passed over. It worked in some regard as one fighter got himself stuck trying to get over it, and the other 2 alone were much more manageable. I killed one of them and soon after managed to kill the second one. At this point though, all my health potions were gone and I was really low on HP. I readied myself as the last fighter came running back up. I'd like to think I fought well here, dodging his heavy attacks and timing my strikes in between so I could jump in and quickly get out. With a little bit of luck, I dealt the killing blow, and that was the last of the resistance in the cave. Continuing along the tunnel system for a bit brought me to Ajum Kajin, who willingly followed me out of the cave and back over to Coral. Once back at Modron's home, we seated him down and I began wailing on him for answers. He told us how many members the Blackwood Company had, as well as who their leader was, but as soon as he was asked about the source of their power, Ajum Kajin equipped a cursed ring and ended up dying. Speaking with Modron, he gave me the reward of the Lesser Amulet of Interrogation. He then directed me to do what could be my favorite quest in this whole storyline. I was sent over to the Blackwood Company's headquarters in Leyawiin in order to infiltrate their ranks. Doing so, I spoke with Jitum Z, whom, after hearing the lie that I left the Fighters Guild due to money, welcomed me with open arms. I followed him to the basement where he gave out a contract to myself and several other newer members. At the end of it, he informed me of their history and how they use its sap to embolden their fighters. Drinking my portion of the elixir, I blacked out and ended up at Water's Edge. The four of us were tasked with killing the goblins that were causing trouble to the settlement. I went in, fists blazing, totally aware that I was actually slaying its sheep and settlers. The other three fighters held most of the aggro, and I really didn't need to deal much damage either. From there, I went into each individual house and continued with the carnage. Once all of the goblins were defeated, I blacked out again and woke up in Modron's home all the way out in Coral. Orain fills me in on how I got back, and I tell him about the history sap. He suggests that I go back to Water's Edge in order to see what had actually happened. This was where I saw exactly what and who I killed whilst under the influence of the elixir. Speaking with Marcel Emilian, Bien's father, it is a pretty emotional and troubling time to be a part of. Returning to Modron, he tells me that it wasn't my fault and suggests one final assault against the Blackwood Company in Leyawiin. Returning back to Falanu one last time, I bought 2 more potions from her, although to be honest, I was fairly confident that I had the rest of this storyline in the bag. Going to Leyawiin and entering inside of the Blackwood Company headquarters, they were all aggressive towards me now, so I proceeded to pull each individual member out of their establishment and kite them through the town, allowing the townsfolk to jump in on the action. The second guard posted in their HQ was an archer, so I was able to take matters into my own hands by getting in close and battering him down. The third was another sword fighter, so I took him through a tour of the town and he didn't actually make it that far at all. Because this final bit took place in the city and I knew the guards and citizens were going to be on my side, I was pretty much in celebration mode already. The fourth person I baited and lured outside was Jitum Z, a necessary kill in order to get to Rizikar. For Jitum, I ran pretty far and didn't look back for some time. When I finally did though, he'd gone his own way into town, creating all new enemies. By the time I laid eyes on him again, his body was lifeless on the ground. Going after the big boss now, he took a little more work to lure down the HQ and out into the streets. Once I did though, the townspeople who hated this group just as much as the Fighters Guild did got their sweet revenge. Before I knew it, Rizikar was dead and all that was left was the history. Making my way down into their basement, the 2 enemies I faced were these crazed workers named Hears Voices in the Air and Sings Like Thunder. I decided for this one that I would take them on alone, as one final send-off for this Oblivion challenge. Halfway through the fight, things were looking dire, so I popped my final 2 health potions. Shortly after that, Hears Voices was dead. Sings Like Thunder put up a great match, as for a bit, it looked like the result was going to be a toss-up. Ultimately, in the end, I got the upper hand and beat him down. Grabbing the 2 loose pipes that were laying around, I jammed them into the machines, setting fire to the tree. Exiting the basement, the final boss arrived, and Maglir was extremely mad at me. Again, 0 redeeming qualities in his character, so because he wanted to be a Blackwood Company merc so bad, I let him die like one. I brought him out into the streets where the people who once respected and admired him could tear him apart. With Maglir slain, thus ends the Fighters Guild questline, and ultimately, my Oblivion challenge run finishes off as a success. So, what are my thoughts on the Beggar build and role-playing as one through quests? Well, as you probably could have guessed, this build is not good for anything other than a challenge. To be honest, as the storyline progressed, I wasn't having as much fun as I was originally and was kind of more so just gunning for it to be over. It's a hard way to play through the game, and there isn't much room for growth or development with this build. If I was anything beyond level 1 or 2, I think this questline would have become even more difficult to get through, especially when it came to facing off against the trolls. For the most part, it felt like I was going to be a hand-to-hand fighter, destined to have already reached my ceiling. I'm happy and content with the way I handled the build though. It felt right not to use any offensive or defensive gear, and it's always fun to work for what you buy. I did do a lot of fighting, and it feels like beggars do more running than combat, but it was pretty necessary for being able to actually get through these quests. Again, similar to the Conjuror run-through in the arena, health potions were the MVPs, along with external help from nearby citizens. Overall, it felt like a success, and for the most part, I did have fun. I'm looking forward to getting to do more of these. On the screen are the ideas that will be done in the near future. If you have any more you'd like to suggest, feel free to comment them below, and until next time, keep on adventuring. In today's video, I'm going to be embarking on my next challenge playthrough for the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. For this one, I want to try my hand at completing the Thieves Guild while playing as a Barbarian. For this one, I don't really have any rules or guidelines that I'd like to follow. Mostly, I want to play through this questline, act as sort of a Barbarian would during the quests, and see how far it gets me. My goal is to probably put stealth to the side and focus on getting what I want through the means of violence. As you could probably expect, the first couple of quests should be no issue. However, it's the latter half of the quest line that I'm very curious to see how it's going to play out. So without further ado, let's get into the playthrough. As a quick note, I'm currently recording this part after I got what I wanted out of this run. To be completely honest, for most of these quests, I had to go out of my way to make the excitement happen, as organically, challenge-wise, they were hard to come by. In the end, I talked about some conclusions that I came to with the Thieves Guild and some changes I'd make for future challenge runs. But for now though, I hope you enjoy it.
Capital!
For my character's race, I picked an orc. For their class, I specifically chose the Barbarian set. The specialization is in combat, the favorite attributes are strength and speed. The major skills are armor, athletics, blade, block, blunt, hand-to-hand, and light armor. Then finally, for the star sign, I picked the warrior, which gives a +10 bonus to both strength and endurance. To actually get in contact with the Thieves Guild, I went over to the Imperial City and gave the biggest swing that I could at an Imperial Watchman's head.
What's going on? Stop! You violated the law!
From there, I went to jail, did my time, and got released on an account of losing 1 skill point to heavy armor, which I didn't really mind that much. From there, I just waited around for Mivrana Arano to pay me a visit, but the only issue is that she never came. I waited for quite some time in the Imperial City, and yet there was no message from the Grey Fox. Resorting to just learning about the faction through City Swimmer, I fast traveled to Breville, waited around for daytime, and then lo and behold, Mivrana finally showed up. She handed me the note, and from there, it was off to the races for Dareloth Garden. Waiting for midnight, I approached the trio, spoke with Armand Kristoff, he gave us the whole initiation spiel, told us about the competition, and then it was go time. To be honest, I couldn't remember where Amantius Electus' house was. I knew that Methridel knew though, so I just followed her. In the past, when I've done the initiation quest, normally Methridel is far outpacing me, but I guess since I picked the Barbarian class, I have a nice buff to my speed, so it was cool to actually be able to keep up. The two of us arrived at Electus' home, she went in, and I was left outside picking the lock. I had to be really careful because I only had 1 lockpick here, but as soon as I made it inside, I went straight for the desk, took the diary, and that was pretty much that for May the Best Thief win.
Thief! You stole that diary from me! Now I have to wait to get into the guild!
Returning back to the Garden of Dariloth, I handed the diary over to Armand and he welcomed me to the guild. May the best thief win is honestly no trouble for a barbarian or pretty much any class. There really isn't that much sneaking involved and there's nobody that really gets in your way besides Methridel. Of course, if you were to fail this competition, there are other means to obtain the diary or even other tasks that you're given to get into the faction, so this sort of initiation is probably the easiest one all around. After the whole talk with Armand Christophe, I quickly went back to Vilverin in order to get some more barbarian appropriate gear. Then from there I fast traveled over to Bruma, where I could steal some goods and fence them over to Ongar. My most productive spot happened to be the Mages Guild Hall. Right in the front entrance there was nobody there, so I scoured through the guild's books, took all of their apparatus, moved around to different rooms just to stay away from prying eyes, and ultimately ended up making off with a huge score. Once all was said and done, I fenced over 500 gold worth of products to Ongar, and that definitely set me way ahead for independent thievery. Returning to Armand, he gave me the quest of untaxing the poor. He told me to sneak into Hieronymus Lex's quarters, and from there steal the tax records. The guard tower is super easy and free to get into. The first level isn't considered trespassing, but ascending up the ladder to the second, third, and fourth is. Picking the lock and getting into Hieronymus Lex's quarters, I saw the captain sleeping and thought that this would be an easy take. During my first attempt, all of my lockpicks broke, and so I assumed that Lex might have a key on him. For some reason, my mind went for the barbarian tactic of just trying to kill him and then taking the key, but then this turned into what I thought was a very clever play. I had never actually tried to kill Lex before, so if I actually managed to achieve that here and now, and the guard captain died, I wondered what was going to happen with the rest of this questline. It was also perfect because he was completely unarmed and in his pajamas. He still gave in one heck of a fight, and after I delivered what I thought was the killing blow, I realized how naive I was when I got the message saying that he was unconscious. I tried to loot the key, but it wouldn't let me, so I just reverted back and picked the lock to the desk. Taking the records and the gold from my troubles, I descended back down the watchtower, and the guards pretty much didn't even care that I was there.
Oh hey, sweet lady of Wayrest, oh hey, sweet lady of mine. Oh, I'll see you again, yes, I'll see you again, sweet lady of Wayrest, so fine.
Returning back to Armand, he took the records, told me I could keep the gold, and promoted me to the rank of footpad. Immediately after that conversation was done, I got the go-ahead from Independent Thievery and spoke again with the Red Guard. This time he gave me the task of retrieving the bust of Shadenhall's late Countess. I knew that finally this would be a quest where things could get interesting. Fast traveling over to the major city and tossing 15 septims to one of the beggars, they told me to search down in the undercroft of the chapel and to beware that it could be haunted.
Used to be anyone could visit her, but now it's off limits to the public.
Going into the chapel and picking the lock to the undercroft, I waited around for a bit in order to encounter the bodyguard. She came running in at me, and in one good swing with the warhammer, I absolutely flattened her. It felt pretty good, but then I got the quest notification that I had completely forgotten about. I of course remembered that there were blood prices, but I had no clue that they were worth over 1,000 gold. Taking Lathasa's bust, I exited the Undercroft and began my mission of making amends to the guild. Fortunately, I had over 500 from my previous time doing independent thievery, but now I just had to double that. I went over to the Shadenhall Mages Guild Hall, stole every single piece of alchemical apparatus, book, potion, etc. Then I went into the Fighters Guild Hall and took some weapons, pelts, anything that I could really get my hands on. Thinking I'd be squared away, I sold every single thing that I had just looted and was unfortunately still 27 gold shy. So for my next hit, I decided to go into the Chapel Hall. And honestly, there were some big scores here. Lots of valuable books, cups, silverware, utensils, food, beverages. There were a lot of things to get my hands on here. At one point, I stumbled a little too far and unleashed Pandora's box. This NPC kept following me around, but maybe because I was in the darkness, she couldn't actually see me, but there were a lot of close calls. Finally, I decided to leave, sold the rest of my goods to Ongar, and happily traveled back to the Imperial City in order to pay off my blood price. Funnily enough, I had completely forgotten that there was a second part to the Elven Maiden quest, so after getting the update, Methridel came rushing in, informed me of what was going on, and then it was off to Mavrana Arano's house to frame her for stealing the bust. There were eyes on me from all over the place, so I decided to just brave it, break into her home, and let off one big swing with my warhammer, but unfortunately she just went unconscious, so I placed the bust and ran off to Hieronymus Lex. I convinced him that she was the thief, followed him to her house, he accosted her and dragged her off to jail. Waiting until midnight, Armand Christophe showed up again, and upon speaking with him, he was happy that that whole situation was taken care of. However, he did say that I'd be temporarily kicked out of the guild due to killing that guard back in the chapel. Paying off the blood price of 1,000 gold, Armand promoted me to the rank of bandit and sent me over to the likes of Scriva for further contracts. Fast traveling over to Breville, I sought out the Khajiit, and she gave me the quest of Adarji's heirloom. Going over to Leowin, I spoke with D the Scalawag, and he told me the whereabouts for my person of interest. Adarji explained that it was Amusai who stole the ring from her, but she doesn't know where he is right now. After tossing a few gold in the direction of Mr. Scalawag, he tells me that Amusai was actually dragged off to jail. Going into the castle and descending to the dungeons, I slipped past the guard on duty and picked the lock into the holding area. Encountering Amusai, he tells me that the ring actually belongs to the Countess Alessia, and that if I want it recovered, I'll have to get in close to her. Throwing more gold at Mr. Scalawag, he tells me that I should seek out Hladara Mothril, the handmaiden of the Countess. As an aside, I've likely heard it before, but this is the first time I ever recall an NPC telling me about the torture room. During my official run for the Thieves Guild, I don't recall any of the beggars telling me about it, but also maybe I never asked. Seeking out Hladara in the castle hall, I ask her about the Countess's routine as well as the torture chamber. She doesn't divulge any information at first, but after throwing a few septims her way, she begins to talk. She tells me that the passageway leads directly to the Count and Countess's quarters, and she also mentions that the Countess leaves on trip during the 15th of every month. I thought it'd be fun to try and blindside the Countess on the road, so I literally waited from the 4th of Heartfire all the way to the 15th. The unofficial wiki does point out that her schedule's kind of bugged, and that proved to be true from here because she did not make her way to Coral. Thinking I could take her in the streets, I took one big swing at her head with my warhammer and tried to whittle her health down from there. She was certainly a lot tougher than she looks, and after a certain point of enough health lost, she began to run away from me, and as I chased her, the guards chased me. Leaving the city limits, I noticed that her handmaiden was actually fighting against the guards. I guess she knew how horrible of a person Alessia actually was and decided to stand up against her. That didn't last long though, and soon the Countess went back inside of the city, and as I lined up for my kill, I faced down the firing squad.
Getting tired?
From here, I just decided to use the secret entrance from the basement. It's gonna sound weird, but the torture room is actually one of my favorite rooms in this game, simply because of the secrecy surrounding it, as well as its sinister intentions. It's really good fuel for the hatred towards the Count and Countess of Leowin. Soon, I found myself nearing their quarters. Doing a bit more looting on the way, I actually found a handful of paintbrushes, which were about to come in handy. I watched the patrol walk in the other direction, and then slowly made my way towards their bedroom. Once inside, I put down the paintbrushes in order to cover the exit. From here, it was go time, and I began to swing away at the Countess. In a panic, both of them woke up and began to fight for their lives. Alessia made a break for the door while the guard tried to come in. Again though, the game got the better of me, and Alessia actually went down as unconscious. I had forgotten that she was deemed essential literally until this quest is finished. So I reverted to my boring save and picked the lock into the jewelry box. I took the heirloom along with everything else that was inside, and then from there safely exited the castle. Returning to Adarji, I handed over the heirloom, in which she gave me my 100 gold. Back in Breville, Scriva promoted me to the rank of Prowler and rewarded me with 200 more gold. So far, this questline has proven to be incredibly accessible for all classes and skill types. I really wanted to see the pros and cons for playing as a barbarian, but so far I haven't really been seeing anything that would make this playthrough easier or more difficult. However, that would soon change. Speaking with Scriva again, she gave me the quest of Misdirection. Speaking with Ragbag Buntara, she told me the location of Methredel's hideout. Methredel told me about the current state of the waterfront, how the Thieves Guild was in shambles, and finally her master plan to swerve Hieronymus Lex. I've always found the theft of Horomir's ice staff to be kind of comical. The Thieves Guild makes it out to be such a big deal to sneak into the Mages Guild, but it's only a matter of taking 2 different teleporters. It doesn't even really matter too if anybody sees you, as it takes a little bit for the trespassing charge to kick in. Erlov Jirol was pretty suspicious of me, so I did have to leave in a hurry, but I secured the ice staff and slipped the note into the Archmage's nightstand. Again, no sneaking or, more importantly, violence needed. Handing the staff over to Methridel, she then told me to keep an eye on Lex. Going over to the waterfront,
Oh hey, sweet lady of Wayrest.
and nearing the guard captain, a Dremora foot soldier approached, handed him the note, and the rest was pretty much history. Methridel told me to go frame Ontis Vanis. His house was super easy to break into, including the upstairs. The staff was stored in his chest, and I returned to Scriva for my reward. I felt like I was going to be needing to pay off a blood price sooner than later, so I paid a visit to Luciana Galena and fenced off a lot of my stolen goods. Scriva then gave me my next contract of Lost Histories, and this one I was actually pretty excited for. I knew there'd be at least one person I'd get to fight with my Warhammer. Nigidius the Needy told me the story of how Theranis was caught for theft and dragged off to prison. Descending to the castle dungeons, I tried to convince the Skingrad jailer to let me go into the holding area, but he wasn't having any of it, and instead of going through the castle steward, I decided to let out my barbarian side. I began to clobber him with my Warhammer, and to be honest, I thought he'd put up a more difficult fight. Maybe because he's a jailer, or perhaps because he's not an Imperial city guard, but he certainly wasn't that strong of an opponent. After committing the murder, I received the quest for blood price, which I knew was coming, but I was able to loot the castle keys off of his body. Down below, I came across my good friend Glarthir the Laggard.
Are you here to rescue me? You bastard! It's not like I killed her!
I covered my escape with paintbrushes and let Laggard out of his cell. I really wanted to hit him, so that's what I did, but unfortunately, he too was only knocked unconscious, but I wasn't sure why. I didn't know that he was an essential NPC. I suppose for this quest he gives vital information, but he's also an NPC that you can just bypass, so that was kinda confusing, but regardless, I continued onwards. Soon, I found myself in the wine cellar, pulled on the strange candle, and a door leading through the barrel opened up. I got myself caught in between a rock and a hard place here though. Blocking off my exit was an Imperial guard, really keen on arresting me, and just further along the path was the Pale Lady. Of course, the only option was to go forward, so I charged in with my Warhammer, and actually managed to kill her with only a few swings. I stripped Theranis of all of his belongings, because I could sell those back to the guild, spoke with Amusai about the book, and then released him from his prison. Now this part here was the real kicker. The guard was still avidly trying to get to me. There was only one way in and one way out, and he was blocking it. Thinking this would have to end in violence, I marched up with my Warhammer in hand, and for some strange reason, the guard just lost interest and started to walk away. I'd never had that happen before, especially since I was right in front of him, but maybe because it was so dark he couldn't see me and there was a problem then with his coding or something. I have no clue, but it was the perfect time for us to make our escape. Amosai and I left the castle, and then he told me where Theranis hid the Lost Histories book. This was where I made a crucial error. I should have returned back to Scriva or to Armand Kristoff, had my fine removed, and then went back to Skingrad. However, because I went straight into the city, a guard arrested me and I was forced to serve some time. Regardless, I found and retrieved the book, brought it back to Scriva in Breville, and she rewarded me for my efforts. Not before I had to pay off the blood price though. Getting straight into the next contract, Scriva filled me in on how Hieronymus Lex needs to be permanently reassigned. I spoke with the beggar Penniless Ulvis, and he told me that I should speak with the castle's blacksmith. Arriving in the smithy, I kept the cycle of thievery going on by stealing from him, another follower of the Grey Fox. Orin opened up the castle's secret passageway, and it was up to Darahill's office for me. Casually walking past the guard on duty, I broke into her desk and took the list of recommendations. Returning back to Penniless, he told me of a forger who goes by the name of the Stranger. Paying a visit to this stranger, aka the Grey Fox, aka Corvus Umbernox, I hand him the letter and he tells me to come back in 24 hours. I pay him out 500 gold for his fee, and he tells me that Hieronymus Lex now has a glowing recommendation. My next order of business is to give this an official seal. This involves breaking into the captain's office, and the issue was that I was never out of sight for any of the watchmen. So with all eyes on me, I decided to just break into the place, and it worked out in my favor. I stamped the letter, and then went back to Anvil in order to deliver it to the Countess. She realized that Hieronymus Lex would be the best choice. She filled out his name game, handed the letter back to me, and then I got tipped by the very angry Darahil. Going back over to the Imperial City waterfront, I handed the transfer papers over to Lex, and he knew it was over.
After all these years, he's finally won.
Fast traveling back to Breville, Scriva was ecstatic to hear about Lex's reassignment. I got promoted to the rank of Shadowfoot, and she rewarded me handsomely for my efforts. Up until now, the Thieves Guild has been pretty lackluster when it comes to challenges. For the most part, I've been able to walk in, grab what I need, and walk out. Stealth hasn't really been much of an issue, there hasn't been too many people to fight, but as of right now, that all changes. Methridel comes in and delivers a message from the Great Fox. Meeting him in the city of Bruma, he asks me to retrieve Sevilla's stone from the Temple of the Ancestor Moths. Where this quest gets interesting, and in my opinion very fun, is that there's no blood price for killing any of the stone's guardians. So as soon as I get past a certain point, whatever happens is up to the Nine Divines. Stealing a horse from Bruma's stables, I made the long trek east and arrived at the temple. I pried some information out of Brother Holger, and from there he led me to the entrance of the catacombs. From here, it was finally go time. Of course, my character is a low level, so the world is scaled appropriately, but I would have assumed for a later quest in the Thieves Guild, where a lot of emphasis is put on sneaking around, that these enemies would have been a little bit tougher. There were some priests and prelates who fought with swords, and those ones were certainly a little trickier, but nothing that really caused for alarm down here. It was nice because when I did my official playthrough of the Thieves Guild with my warrior character, my main goal was to actually try and sneak past everything. But with this barbarian character, it's more than okay to fight my way through the ranks. It felt like a nice change of pace, and I really appreciated that. Finally, I got to the last area and battled the final blind moth. He wasn't too tricky to defeat, and right behind him was Sevilla's stone. It was actually this area though that I found to be the most difficult, simply because of the dark Welkin stone, and I aggroed a ghost which I couldn't hit. Leaving through the secret passageway, I encountered a bug in which I've actually come across many times before. I think because the ghost was aggroed onto me and I left through a way in which it couldn't, my game registered this as always being chased by an enemy, so therefore no matter how far I got away from the temple, I could never wait or fast travel. Finally, after doing a hard reset on my game, I was able to go back to Bruma and deliver the stone to the Great Fox. One thing that I found pretty neat was that in my original playthrough, I never found the chest which contains the note for Nocturnal's cowl. So this was my first time getting to experience the dialogue prompt with the Great Fox and calling out his cowl as Nocturnal's cowl. Anyways, after all was said and done, I got a quest update saying to keep an eye out for another messenger from the Great Fox. This time, Amusai showed up and he told me to meet the Great Fox in Coral. Corvus told me to retrieve the Arrow of Extrication from Breville's Court Wizard. Traveling to the City of Swamps, I spoke with Wretched Aya and she told me that Fathus Aran keeps most of his treasures in his wizard tower. This next part was pretty interesting. I went over to the castle and followed the quest marker. It led me to the north wing of the fortress, but the issue is that there was constantly 2 guards keeping an eye on the door. It didn't seem like there were any obvious alternatives, and those guards were not moving from their station, and those guards were not moving from their post. So I decided to just pick the lock right in front of them, resist arrest, and bolt it through the castle. Arriving in Aran's quarters, I located the secret entrance and went down inside of the wizard grotto. The first enemy I got to fight was a Jamora churl. A few swings with my steel warhammer and it was defeated. After that, I took on some conjurers. They actually had incredibly low amounts of health, but when they fought together, they were able to deal some pretty good damage. Again, not to sound like a broken record, last time I went through here, my whole goal was to sneak past everything. So this time, getting to go in guns blazing, warhammer swinging, it felt pretty good. It's certainly a lot quicker and a lot less stressful when you get to use combat first in this game. Fathus Aran's wizard tower was where I had a lot of problems before in my previous playthrough. There were a lot of Atronachs and powerful Daedra who would spot me every time. This time round though, there were only a handful of conjurers and stunted scamps, so it made my time here really easy. And unlike last time, Fathus Aran came rushing over to me. He was hostile and began attacking. I think because I was a part of the Mages Guild with my other character, he didn't really care about me trespassing, but now it seems like he really cares a lot. He wasn't too difficult of a fight, sporting some basic lower level weapons and armor. A few swings with my warhammer and he was dead, and I was then able to break into his chest and steal the arrowhead. Fleeing the tower and fast traveling back to Coral, I handed the piece over to the Great Fox. He was thrilled, promoted me to Master Thief, rewarded me for my efforts, and told me to keep an eye out for another messenger. These quests were starting to heat up for my Barbarian, and honestly, it felt pretty nice. However, I was starting to come to certain conclusions as this faction's questline closed out. Waiting for some time, Amusai finally visited me again, and told me to meet with the Grey Fox in Shadenhall. Doing so, he told me to go and find the boots of Springheel Jack. Fast traveling to the Imperial City, I spoke with Freylove the Faker, and he told me that Jack Ben, Earl of Imbel, lives in the Talos Plaza district. Breaking into his home and ascending to the upper level, I found the vampire and his butler cowering in fear. He gave me the key to the basement and I descended below. I lined up outside of the crypt, ready to face the horrors within, when all of a sudden, Jack Ben snuck up behind me. I knew this man was just waiting for me to go inside, so I decided to cut our encounter short by taking one good swing at him. To my surprise, he died instantly, and even better, the boots were on him, so I didn't even need to go through the rest of the hurdles. Immediately afterwards, a guard came running out of nowhere and tried to arrest me. At the time, I didn't realize it was for breaking and entering and not the murder that I had just committed. So, I decided to resist arrest and flee the scene. 2 Imperial guards followed me far and wide outside of the city. Eventually, I got to a point where I lost them just outside of an Ayleid ruin, and I was then able to fast travel back to Shadenhall. Handing the boots over to Corvus, he told me that the next task was going to be the Thieves Guild's biggest score yet. Waiting around, Amusai appeared again and told me that the Grey Fox wanted to meet in the Imperial City. Knowing that this final quest was for all the marbles, I fenced off my goods, repaired my equipment, and bought as many weak health potions as possible. When it was time, I went over to the Grey Fox, and he told me about his master plan to steal an Elder Scroll. The first task was to enter inside of the palace's basement section and activate the Glass of Time. Being confronted by the palace guard, things were off to a rocky start as he was way more powerful than I was. He beat me down pretty quickly, and I lost a little bit of confidence in my ability to take on the guards. As a bit of a spoiler, I do get my confidence back a little later, but for now, I just decided to casually walk behind this guy's trail and interact with the giant hourglass. From the palace, I went over to the Arbitorium and climbed down into the East Tunnel section. The tunnel mostly contained nuisance creatures like rats and mud crabs. From there, I entered into the Bloodwork sewers, and the fun began. This spot was crawling with undead, mostly skeletons and vampires. Nothing too tricky or challenging to defeat, but I'm always a little nervous when fighting the vampires, as I don't want to contract porphyric hemophilia. Even with potions of cure disease on me, it feels like it's an irrational fear at this point. None of the enemies were really grouped up, and I feel like that would be my weakness for this playthrough. The sewer section was like the previous one, where I needed to raise and lower a variety of gates, soon taking me to the palace sewers. The palace sewers contained more of the same enemies. This section though was a whole lot smaller, contained less enemies, and before I knew it, I ended up at the Old Way. The Old Way consisted of mostly undead creatures. I remember last time, this was the trickiest area for me to have snuck through. There were so many ghosts, skeletons, wraiths, etc. per square foot that it seemed like there were always eyes on me. This time though, I was able to quickly bash my way through the skeletons. Something I didn't really account for though was weapon condition. As my time went on here, my Warhammer was slowly becoming more and more broken. Its base damage was getting pretty poor, and I needed to pick up some other barbarian-like weapons on the way. The Lost Catacombs section was lengthy, but nothing that Grow wasn't able to truck on through. Eventually, I got to the area just before the Hall of Epochs. I fought my way through the remainder of skeletons, and just before I pressed the push block, I noticed a small bedroll. Deciding to sleep in it for a level up, I got absolutely jump scared.
You sleep rather soundly for a murderer. That's good.
Fighting my way through the Hall of Epochs, I ended up in the central room with the Ayleid statues. Instead of lowering the walls and allowing me easy access to the pressure plate, I really wanted to try and parkour my way over to it. I tried so desperately to make it work during my original playthrough, but it was practically impossible. Again, this time I struggled to make it happen. According to the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, it's possible to do, but apparently I would need crazy acrobatic skills and the boots of Springheel Jack. So I just decided to go the long way and descend to the lower levels. The only enemy of interest here was a ghost that I had no way of fighting. Fortunately, after activating the button, I didn't see the ghost again, which was good for my sanity. I fought off the undead that spilled out of the false walls, which mostly contained zombies. The zombies were actually tricky opponents to battle. I've always found them difficult at lower levels and with a lack of fire enchantment. Once done, I fired off the arrow of extrication and fought against the Ayleid Guardians. These things actually gave me a good run for my money. They were challenging, had decent health, hit hard, and made me use up some of my much needed health potions. Once done, it was time to go into the final place of interest. Within the guards' quarters, I was immediately seen by Palace Patrol. I was nervous for this encounter because just in the other room, there were at least 3 other guards snoozing. Not to mention, last time I got my face kicked in, so I wasn't sure how I was going to handle this one. The fight actually went a little better than I thought. I focused on the basic combat fundamentals, if that's such a thing, and did have to tap into my health potions. Luckily, none of the other guards woke up during our battle, and as soon as I beat him down, I was able to move on to the next zone. In the Elder Scrolls library, I was immediately seen by another guard who was picking up some scraps of paper. Deciding to get in there again, we duked it out in the hallways. For some reason, I was still pretty insistent on not switching to my other weapons, and wanted to use the Warhammer still. It dealt the most base damage, but overall DPS was certainly something that I was not considering. I had to pop far more health potions for this encounter, and only in the end did I switch to the Steel War Axe and get the better of him. From there, it was easy access into the library itself.
Celia Cameron, I present to you the Elder Scroll you requested.
I stayed silent, the monks handed me the Elder Scroll, and all that was left to do now was flee the palace. I purposefully interacted with one of them just so they would all come over to me and I could eliminate the monks one by one. They weren't any tougher than the ones from the temple, and from here I continued with my escape. I quickly ran into another palace guard and I was a little nervous for it as I was low on health potions. This time though, the Steel War Axe proved to be a champion's weapon. I found myself able to stagger the guard back a decent amount of times. I still needed to pop some health pots, but nothing too crazy here. After he was slain, I moved on to the Moth Priest's quarters. Inside, I was met with the resistance of a handful of blind monks. They fought with their fists and katanas, and to be honest, I was just happy that they weren't palace guards. I cut through them with my Steel War Axe, dropping their bodies to the floor, and all while going at a nice and steady pace. I purposefully went into their quarters and completely wiped them out. This encounter felt more like bullying than anything, but honestly, I kind of enjoyed the easier fights and change of pace. The last zone was the Imperial Battle Mage's quarters. This area was pretty free, and I had the perfect opportunity to easily slip past both Evangeline Bianique and the Palace Guard. But, to be honest, my vendetta against the Battle Mage was pretty personal. Last time, she camped the exit and made it impossible for me to leave undetected. This time, she gets up and completely leaves the fireplace. I wasn't going to let it fly, so I literally waited for her to come back and cut her down in her chambers. From there, I took the hatch back down into the old way, broke the boots of Spring-Heeled Jack, and the rest was history. I fled the sewers, emerged from the best defenses basement, and brought the scroll back to the Grey Fox. This successfully completed my challenge playthrough for a barbarian progressing through the ranks of the Thieves Guild.
Capital!
I did come to some pretty important conclusions whilst playing through this quote-unquote challenge run. The Thieves Guild questline is one that could be done with very little challenge for any class. The player can easily sneak past most NPCs and enemies regardless of skill level, and even for combat's sake, none of the areas are too tricky to fight through, say except for maybe the ultimate heist. So, when I do the Thieves Guild questline again for a challenge playthrough, I think it could be best to keep it unrelated to combat, or to make the combat restrictions very harsh, and that's something I would really like your help in choosing. I really do think though that the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood were made to be focused on their storylines and overall player enjoyment, as opposed to the Mages Guild and Fighters Guild, which are rather dependent on heavy dungeon crawling. For my previous challenge playthroughs, I tried to make the rules fairly strict, and for this one, they weren't strict enough, and I think that resulted in it being rather easy. Either way, this questline is always a treat to get to play through, and I appreciate you sticking through this video, even though it wasn't as spicy or on the edge as the previous ones. Coming up next is the Dark Brotherhood no-kill run, as well as the main quest, Tutorial Goblin Staff only and with 1 life. If you have any suggestions for playthroughs, let me know down below, and until next time, keep on adventuring. In today's video, I'm going to embark on a smaller challenge playthrough featured in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. As per your recommendation, I'm going to try and keep Glarthir alive long enough for him to take out his aggressors. The challenge laid out is getting the paranoid wood elf through the city of Skingrad. He's to arrive at all of his enemies' homes and defeat them in combat, all while avoiding the hordes of guards coming after him. The most complicated part is getting him through it without attacking or aggroing onto anyone myself. I'm to play more of a guardian angel role in Glarthir's life, but honestly, if you stick around, you'll see how all of this goes down. Before going any further though, you need to know that this playthrough is chaotic, messy, all over the place, and the guidelines / rules laid out for this run are pretty blurry. There's a lack of structure, order, and organization when bringing this fetcher across town, and I try out unconventional means of meeting my goal. The end result may or may not be what you're expecting. This really is a video centered all around shenanigans and serves no greater purpose than that. So, with all of that being said, if you're here for a fun and entertaining time, let's begin.
I'm not a violent person, but I can only be pushed so far.
Many of us know who Glarthir is and the plot surrounding his questline. If you don't know about him though, he's a paranoid wood elf who approaches you in Skingrad. He believes that certain citizens in the city are watching him. His quest has many different branches, pathways, and options for the player to experiment with. If you play by his rules, he'll ask you to observe 3 different NPCs in town. After doing so, he'll then ask you to assassinate them. This quest ends in someone's death. Whether it's Glarthir's or the NPC's, someone dies. One of the alternative pathways I mentioned in the beginning can happen as soon as you meet with him behind the chapel. By refusing to help Glarthir, he'll begin to say even stranger dialogue and storm off.
My enemies think I'm weak, that I'll never act. Could be the blades. They've always feared me. It must be the Marukati selectives. All the evidence points to them. I'm not a violent person, but I can only be pushed so far.
Following him across town, he slowly walks to his home and enters inside. By ascending up the stairs to his room, you'll see him pick up an iron battle axe and begin to walk out. This is where his rampage and my work begins. Glarthir's first target is Bernadette Penniless, and lucky for me, she lives right across from him. We go inside of her home and march up the stairs. Finding her asleep on the 2nd floor, Glarthir takes out his battle axe and begins to hack away. Knowing how these fights go, I body block the doorway so neither of them can take it out into the streets.
Did you think I would be your puppet?
I'm just warming up.
Honestly, my aim in these games is horrible to begin with. Throw in the fact that Glarthir and his opponents constantly dance around together, swiftly moving to whole new areas, makes it even harder to tag him with healing spells. For some background information, my character is level 1, but has a really ramped up restoration level. I'm using Convalescence, which is an apprentice level spell, and it heals the target for 15 points. Bernadette wasn't a hard battle for Glarthir, and this was due to her lack of weapon and armor. The use of hand-to-hand was questionable though, as she kept knocking him down, prolonging the fight. Soon, Glarthir landed the killing blow, and that was one of 3 targets assassinated. Together, we moved on out of the house and walked the streets northeast. Wrapping around the chapel, Glarthir and I hit the crux point for this entire playthrough. Like the omniscient super soldier he is, Dion would always intercept us on the north side of the chapel. He'd approach Glarthir, the two of them would awkwardly stare at each other for a moment, and then the weapons came out. Quite obviously, there was a huge skill difference between the two of them. Dion had his armor set as well as a steel longsword, whilst Glarthir fought in his pajamas with a battle axe.
You're pathetic!
It seems that as soon as Glarthir commits his first murder, the town is on high alert for him. Dion always seems to be able to locate him, and the guards will soon aggro on sight. I was working overtime healing Glarthir like crazy. Every heavy attack landed by Dion had me in shambles, as Glarthir's health would drop by half. I didn't really have to worry too much about magicka cost with Bernadette, but with Dion, my bar was going down faster than it would go up. The fight would soon get even more complicated when another guard would come running in to join it. He'd take pot shots at Glarthir with his bow, and while the damage wasn't too frequent, a second marksman would show up and begin to take aim. Soon, Glarthir was starting to look like Boromir. The fight was soon determined though when one of the guards decided to rush in with his sword. With a few swings from both him and Dion, Glarthir was killed. Not all hope was lost though, as Glarthir managed to take Dion out with him, showing me that there was some potential here. For fun, I resurrected Glarthir just to see how the guards would react, and to see if he would continue on his mission. This idea didn't really work though, so I reverted back to just after Bernadette's death. Trying again, Dion met us at the exact same point, and the two of them duked it out. Sure enough, the archers showed up as well and started to litter Glarthir with arrows. Fortunately, he was able to kill Dion this time. I was unsure of how this was going to play out next though, and to my dismay, he rushed right into the archers and began swinging. A third town guard came out of nowhere, and together, all three of them cut down Glarthir in the streets. For this next try, I tested out using Superior Convalescence, which heals my target for 20 points for 4 seconds. It's an expert level spell and is equally useful as it is magicka hungry. Dion met us at what I'm coining as Dion's Pass, and the battle began. If you watched my Arena Challenge playthrough, you'll know that I had better luck using lower level casts and spells. The higher level ones sapped up too much of my magicka, and I was pretty much dealing with the exact same problem here. For healing, it's better to be reactive rather than proactive. Dion would hit Glarthir too frequently, and I wasn't able to keep up with the demands. Switching back to the regular convalescence spell, it was a lot easier to manage and heal Glarthir. At this point, he was able to kill Dion no problem, but the part he just couldn't get past was the twin archers, just at the edge of Dion's Pass. Glarthir would get in too close, they would take out their swords and overwhelm him with their attacks. At this point, I really started to ramp up with my Guardian Angel role. For curiosity's sake, I spawned in some lowly bandits and hoped that they would either kill Dion or distract the whole town guard. Dion was way too strong for the bandit though and slew him with one hit. The same went for a bandit hedge wizard, so I decided to spawn in a whole bunch of bandit bowmen. Most of them aggroed onto Dion, and it seemed like my plan was working perfectly. That was until Dion specifically targeted Glarthir and killed him amongst the chaos. Trying it out with 10 bowmen, the fight was even more messy and disorganized, and I decided to scrap the idea of spawns altogether. For this next try, I was sort of onto something, but there was a fundamental issue with it. I gave myself the spell of Disintegrate Weapon and began casting it on Dion. It worked well and his sword broke, rendering him mostly defenseless. The problem though was that this spell was a part of the Destruction School, so it did count as aggroing/attacking an NPC for Glarthir. In some ways, this fight was harder to watch, as Glarthir kept getting knocked down. The fight certainly went on a lot longer, and on the first attempt, another town guard came in right away to shut it down. On the second try, I incorporated Disintegrate Armor into the mix. It was a little hard to tell how much of an effect it was actually having, and to be honest, my time and effort spent doing that meant I wasn't able to heal the Wood Elf. I also made the mistake of taking away the other town guard's bow, as that led to him rushing to Dion's side and killing Glarthir with their swords. For this next attempt, I wanted to see what would happen if I advanced in levels a bit. I put myself up to level 10 and got to Dion's Pass. This also didn't really work out and actually resulted in a much worse outcome. Glarthir could barely do any damage to the town guard, my healing spells practically did nothing for him, and he was hitting Dion for even less damage. I didn't make it very far with this tactic, and it was at this point that I decided to do a slow escalation for this questline. Undergoing a complete do-over, I followed Glarthir to his home, he retrieved his battle axe, we went into Bernadette's house, and I body blocked the doorway again. Glarthir killed his first target, and we moved through the streets. This time, I toggled the Detect Console command and we moved through them freely. We were still intercepted at Dion's Pass, but the interaction went a lot smoother.
Yes?
They say that the priests and priestesses of the Chapel of Dibella have all been murdered. No one even knows who did it.
No!
Absolutely.
I found this part so funny, as you can see that Dion so desperately wants to kill Glarthir, but as soon as he reaches him, his AI gets altered and he turns into a chatterbox rather than a killing machine. Glarthir and I get an official escort to Tudius Sextius' home. The first time I made it in here during an alternate attempt, Glarthir took on Tudius, but I didn't do a good job at keeping him contained. Due to his house's build, it's a little more difficult to heal Glarthir and body block at the same time. If Tudius makes it into the streets, then it's game over. So this time I put more emphasis into blocking the doorway and less into healing. After all, Tudius was only using his fists and Glarthir had a battle axe.
I think you should leave.
On Glarthir's second attempt, I abused my guardian angel powers and obtained some iron daggers and paintbrushes. Entering inside of Sextius's chambers, I dropped a dagger by his bed, hoping that he would use it during the fight. I then plastered the doorway with paintbrushes. This way, no fighter could leave the room. Toggling detect, the battle began, and this time, I was able to move a lot more freely. Tudius didn't bother picking up the dagger, which was unfortunate. I spam healed Glarthir, as to be honest, Tudius was one heck of a hand-to-hand fighter. At one point, Sextius made a break for the door, but got caught in my trap. He tried to run away for a bit, but after giving up on his attempts to flee, Tudius resumed the brawl. He continued to far outperform Glarthir, and I continued to work overtime. Soon, Glarthir landed the killing blow on Sextius, and that was his second target down. I removed the paintbrushes from the doorway, and together, we exited the home. As soon as we left, Glarthir's Bane showed up and tailed him for a bit. Again, I found this part hilarious, as you can tell that Dion is so desperately trying to fulfill his life's mission, yet, due to some changes in the code, he's stuck in limbo.
The Emperor and his 3 sons dead, right under the noses of the Imperial Guard. It's a disgrace.
I just don't think about it. The Elder Council will take care of things, sooner or later.
After that conversation, Glarthir continued through Dion's pass and entered inside of the Surreal Brothers' backyard. He made his way into their home, and as soon as I went on in, he was nowhere to be found. I looked around for a bit until finally, I discovered that David, Gaston, and Glarthir were upstairs. David immediately descended down and Glarthir followed. I spent too much of my time isolating Gaston with paintbrushes, I didn't even realize that the other 2 left the house. I tried to track them down, but couldn't find them anywhere. Doing it over again, this time I blocked off the backyard gate with some paintbrushes in case David decided to leave this way. Inside the home, I littered the doorway connecting the vestibule and dining room with paintbrushes. David descends the stairs, Glarthir on his tail. I blocked off the upper stairwell to prevent Gaston from joining the fight. When everything was ready, I toggled detect and the battle began. If anything, David Surreal was an even worse fighter than Tudius and Bernadette, and it didn't even really seem like Glarthir needed much of my help. Glarthir throws down the killing swing, and David is defeated. I quickly checked to see if Gaston was bugging out upstairs, but he was actually nowhere to be found. As I was removing the brushes, in the best and most desperate way, Dion enters inside of the home and strikes up a conversation with Glarthir.
Steered clear of them.
Horrid beasts. I hate the things.
Good day.
David's corpse clearly behind us, and Glarthir's axe bloodied. He acts like nothing happened, and I absolutely loved it. The conversation ends and the 2 men go on their way. With AI detection still off, I followed Glarthir around for a bit to see what he would do. After his hard-fought victory, it seemed like he just wanted to stay home and stand in the corner of his bedroom. Waiting a bit longer, he left his home and wandered around town, eventually making it to one of Skingrad's bridges and loitering around. As soon as I toggled detection back on, like hounds to dinner, the town guard came rushing in and slew Glarthir. It was already obvious, but it just further proved that Glarthir was never meant to make it this far. He could maybe take out Bernadette on his own, but he would have never been able to make it to Tudius or David without meeting superior resistance. Wanting to step things up a bit, I restarted over and went through the motions again with Bernadette. Attempting to find creative ways to get through this, I first used console commands to kill Glarthir's opposition. It was kind of a cool scene to see them drop dead, but it was ultimately no different from toggling AI detection. The next thing I tried out was being Glarthir's personal bodyguard. I gave myself impeccable blade skills as well as a Daedric longsword. This unfortunately did break the rules of the playthrough, but I wanted to see where it could get me. Glarthir and I took out Dion in no time, and after the deed was done, he even had the audacity to shame me for it.
By the gods! How could you do such a thing?
Getting past Dion was the easy part. The next part was tricky though. Because I landed the first hit on him, the guards decided to try and accost me rather than Glarthir. Resisting arrest, Glarthir managed to walk past them undetected. It was a beautiful sight, but it didn't last long as I was quickly struck down. Attempting the bridge again, some guards were waiting for us to cross over. They came running in at me, but if I backed up enough, they would quickly switch their attention to Glarthir. While he was taking the heat, I would swoop in from behind and eliminate all of his attackers, all the meanwhile healing him at the same time. Of course, for me, it was easier said than done, and either Glarthir or myself would end up dying on this bridge. Soon, we were actually able to make it past the bridge's defense. I made the mistake though of poking my head out too far from Sextius's home and aggroed onto another guard. Glarthir made his way inside of the house, and I was stuck outside defending it. I cut through the guards and was able to make it into the home, but I thought for sure at this point Glarthir would be dead. Ascending up the stairs and into Tudius's chambers, the scene there shocked me. Sextius laid lifeless on his bed, and Glarthir was nowhere to be found. Ecstatic and slightly worried, I rushed out of the house in an attempt to find him. I looked all over the city, striking down more guards, until finally I saw Glarthir's corpse out in the middle of the town's walkway. It appears as though he wasn't able to make it to the surreal household and died against one of the guards. Trying again from the bridge section, this time I kept my body tucked away behind the home so there would be no line of sight with the guards. Entering inside, we made our way upstairs and Tudius met Glarthir out in the hallway. This was bad though, as when Sextius had enough, he would just run out of the house and circle around town. So I took matters into my own hands and went ahead of Glarthir. Sneaking upstairs, I went inside of Tudius's chambers and waited for him to enter inside. After the wood elf stepped foot into the room, I blocked the way out with paintbrushes and the battle commenced. It went the exact same as while using console commands. Tudius was the better fighter, and I worked double time to keep Glarthir alive. Soon though, the killing blow was delivered and Glarthir and I could continue onwards. Exiting Sextius's home, we backtracked through Dion's Pass and made it into the surreal home no problem. I quickly placed down the paintbrushes in the entranceway and went upstairs. Glarthir had already gone all the way up to the 3rd floor and straight for David's chambers. Letting him inside, he killed David in record time. It seemed like barely a challenge for him, and once done, he nonchalantly left. Gaston came out of his chambers, saw 2 men leave his brother's room with bloodied weapons, and told us to get out because we were trespassing.
This is your last warning. Get out or I'll call the guards and have you arrested.
Exiting the home, Glarthir completed his quest of killing his 3 opposers. He was able to do it with the use of toggling detect, and he was able to do it with me aiding him in combat against the guards. But I still haven't been able to successfully complete this with only using buffs on Glarthir and non-aggressive spells on his attackers. At this point though, it has been proven that he can take out Bernadette, Tudius, and David with the help of a healer. There was one more thing that I wanted to try before throwing in the towel. Paralysis, Demoralize, and Frenzy spells are all under the Illusion School. Counter to what I initially thought, casting these spells on the guards were freebies, as it wouldn't result in them aggroing onto me. Fearful Gaze and Touch of Rage didn't really help me out too much, but the Paralysis spell worked wonders. Dion would be incapacitated for 3 seconds, while Glarthir got in there and chopped away at him. As soon as he would get up, I could cast the spell again, and this cycle would continue until he was beaten. Issues would soon arise though when it came to the 2 archers. I couldn't multitask healing Glarthir and paralyzing his attackers. My magicka would run out too quickly and would render me helpless. At one point though, I paralyzed Dion and Glarthir decided to move on from him. It gave me a further idea that I also wanted to try out. During the next run, I ran ahead of Glarthir and tried to stop Dion in his tracks. It worked at first, but I wasn't ready for Dion's resilience. I just decided to spam the paralysis spell and soon Glarthir moved on again. He was met with the wall of archers though, and my spell casting was put into overdrive. I juggled between paralyzing each guard, rushing over to the next man that had just stood up. This was futile though, as my magicka quickly ran out and the guards swarmed Glarthir. On the next attempt though, something strange happened. Dion didn't run up to his pass. In fact, he was nowhere to be found. We made it to the north side of town, just outside of Tudius's home, but we were met by 3 guards. I tried to juggle healing and paralyzing, but again, it was of no use. To be honest, I'm not really that skilled at this game and its combat features. I don't know if it's within my ability to get Glarthir safely to his target's home without using console commands or combat. I do believe it's possible, and I think I was on the right track with the paralysis spell and paintbrushes, but unfortunately, I just couldn't get it done. So this challenge playthrough is considered failed. Regardless, I really did enjoy myself, and this run really did feel the most chaotic and raw out of the few that I've already done. If any of you have ever attempted this before or are going to attempt it and are or were successful, please feel free to share your strategies down below. On the screen right now are the next few challenge playthroughs that I'll be trying out, and if you have any new ones that you'd like to add, comment them below. Until next time, keep on adventuring. In today's video, I wanted to go through another challenge run in the Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion. However, this time it's going to be a little bit different. It isn't necessarily objectively challenging, rather it's subjectively challenging. For this playthrough, I'm going to embark on the Mages Guild questline while role-playing as a stealth archer. Archery and stealth really aren't my forte in the Elder Scrolls games, and that's why I really wanted to test it out and see what all the chatter was about. Think of this video as one that involves testing out a certain build for the sake of curiosity. It will be a lengthy play-by-play and personal review of my time playing as this class. Of course, it mostly deals with the questline, but there will be other little details and elements of storytelling added in. It isn't meant to be a recounting of the storyline, as that's already up on my channel, but of course, there are elements of that in this playthrough. Next time, I'll be doing an actual kind of more obscure challenge run, but for now, it's time to try out this build. With all of that out of the way, let's begin. My character's name is Bringle, but for the video's sake, we'll call him Bringle 1.0 for now, and you'll see why. Bringle is a Wood Elf, the very first race I ever played as in Oblivion. Lore-wise, Wood Elves are decent at sneaking and have impressive marksmanship, but I've also just been itching to play as one lately. Bringle 1.0's birth sign is the Thief, for the added bonuses to agility, speed, and luck. As for his class, I decided to make a custom one based on the actual assassin class. I didn't want alchemy as a major skill or intelligence as a favorite attribute, so I swapped those out. Instead, my full class setup goes as follows. Specialization is stealth, favorite attributes are agility and speed, and the major skills are sneak, marksman, blade, illusion, light armor, acrobatics, and security. Illusion was supposed to be for casting Chameleon to sneak around, but as you'll see, there's a reason he's Bringle 1.0. Also, Blade was picked as a backup weapon type, but quickly gets underutilized as the story progresses. Because this character is recycled for every new character I make, I usually start out at the end of the sewers. What's more, the character I initially did the tutorial with wasn't supposed to start out with any loot, gold, etc. So, even while trying to retrace my steps through the sewers, picking up what I could, there wasn't much for Bringle to start out with. After the sewers, the first place I went was Vilverin for some bandit gear. Here, I could get some of their light armor, as well as an iron bow and some arrows. With my new weapon in hand, I wanted to try out some target practice with more bandits. There's something really satisfying about lining up a long distance shot and having it connect with your target. Obviously, my first interaction didn't go very well in terms of stealth, but after retrying, things went smoother. I was able to get some sneak attack bonuses, resulting in instant deaths for many of my enemies. This was mostly how I wanted to play. The goal was to stealth kill all of my opponents and remain undetected. As you'll come to see, I got better at it as time went on, but for now, I was just collecting my bearings. Some concerns going into this were obviously running out of arrows and my sneak attacks being unable to one-shot NPCs. Both of these issues get addressed as time goes on, but after Vilverin, I was feeling good and ready to start my journey. I had looted as much as I could from the Iliad ruins in preparation to buy some supplies, and I was mostly kitted out with the weapons and armor I wanted. My first stop was the Imperial City Market District. Heading inside the Slash and Smash, I sold Herbal my extra goods and picked up a bunch more arrows on the way out. My next stop was the Gilded Carafe, where I checked for some poisons but didn't find the ones I wanted. So I decided to pay a visit to Shady Sam. Fun fact about Sam, I had never used his services before, and that's because I had no clue he even existed until a few weeks ago. It was honestly pretty surreal to encounter a new NPC like this. Unfortunately though, Sam wasn't offering any of his services to me, and I think it had to do with my disposition, though I'm not 100% sure. Regardless, I gave up on my dream of getting poisons for now. Everybody, I'd like to show you the root cause of why there's Bringle 1.0 and Bringle 2.0. I decided to artificially boost my sneak using the classic exploits. It's incredibly easy to cheese your way up with sneak in the Elder Scrolls games, and honestly, if it wasn't one of my major skills, it might have worked out in my favor too. As for what I did, I went inside the Gilded Carafe and found the perfect pocket within the stone walls to sneak near Claudette Perrick. The skill went up, and so did my overall player level. Of course, I didn't just sit here for a couple of hours, I simply used console commands to get the rest of the way there, but you get the idea of how easy it is to increase your skill level. Reaching master levels of sneak, the game notified me that my sneak attacks now pierced through enemy armor, and I was super excited to try it out. Heading over to a vacant bed, I went all the way up to level 7 and put most of my extra skill points into speed, agility, and luck. Again, another small mistake on my part. Soon enough, Bringle 2.0 will make an appearance, rectifying almost everything, but for now, it's time to start with the Mages Guild recommendations. I wanted to get all of the ones that didn't involve dungeon raiding and exploration out of the way first. So, to quickly gloss over these parts, the first one I did was the Bruma recommendation. Speaking with Jean, she was actually my induction into the guild, and from there, her task for me was to find Jaskar. Raising Volinaro's disposition and inquiring about the Gajit, he tells me he'll only help me find him if I steal Jean's manual of spellcraft from her office. Breaking into the very easy lock and grabbing the book, the Altmer then tells me to meet him after 10 PM in the basement. Doing so, Volinaro casts a spell and takes away Jaskar's invisibility. The two men talk about which prank to pull next on Jean, and I go cash in on her promise. The next guild hall I go to is Shaden Halls. Speaking with Falkar, he tells me to go retrieve his ring from the well outside and directs me to Deetsan for more information. Deetsan, suspicious of Falkar, tells me to come back later so we can discuss some of her concerns in private. Doing so, she warns me that the last associate who attempted this task was never seen again. She teaches me a water-breathing spell for my safety and hands me the well key. I couldn't remember how much the ring of burden weighed, thinking I might be okay to carry it. When I saw it was 150 pounds, I knew I had to stash my gear away. Usually, I just put everything in Vidkun's inventory, but for some reason, I forgot about doing that this time. Regardless, I picked up the ring and went back to Deetsan. She tells me of Falkar's sick game and how he was trying to get me killed. She then tells me to check and see if he wrote a recommendation for me in the meantime. Descending to his chambers, I only find the black soul gems. Deetsan takes them away from me and writes one on his behalf. The next guild hall I head for is that of Breville's. Talking with Kudai, she tells me that Ardeline has had her mage's staff stolen by Varen Vamori, and that my task is to get it back for her. She gives me a charm scroll and I pathetically fire it off at him. Trying again, this time, he tells me that he sold it to his friend in the Imperial City, Soris Aranim. Reporting back to Kudai, she gives me more charming scrolls and sends me on my way. Heading inside of Soris's home, I sort of remember how this quest played out, so I just went straight for the staff in the basement. In order to sneak down there though, I had to get him and his partner out of eyeshot. I literally forcefully moved their bodies around the corner until I was completely undetected, and then I made my moves. Staff in hand, I returned back to Breville and completed my quest. In between all of these recommendations, I've been stealing a lot of equipment from the halls, mostly alchemy tools, as they fetch a nice and consistent price. I sold them off to some merchants, and then went and bought the chameleon spell from Ida Rienis of the Breville Mages Guild. I was really excited to use it, up until I realized that I didn't have enough magicka for it. If I had picked intelligence as a favorite attribute, or at least put some of my level up points into it, maybe that could have worked. But again, another one of my plans wasn't really coming to fruition. Anyways, the playthrough goes on, and my next recommendation was at the Coral Guild Hall. Tychius' task had me seeking out the estranged Irana, who then told me she was looking for the Fingers of the Mountain book. She asked me to get it for her at the location of Cloudtop. Reporting back to Tychius, he was insistent that the book shouldn't get handed over to her, and that it should be brought back to the hands of the guild. I've always been interested in Irana's motives and the nature of this book. Both of the guild and her greatly value it, and other than her notes, we don't receive much information regarding it. It obviously has something to do with the aliens, and certain powers they possessed long ago, but the rest of it, we're pretty much left in the dark on. Maybe it's for the better too, as it creates more mystery and questions this way. The route to Cloudtop was relatively void of combat. Other than one imp along the way, I made it to the ruins with no problem and snagged the book from the charred corpse. Technically, there's an extended version of this quest which offers the player more rewards, but for the sake of progress, I just handed the book over to Caius and went on my way. The next recommendation was for the Anvil Guildhall. This was sort of where the action was starting to pick up, but not by a whole lot. Carahill told me of the murders near Brina Cross Inn, and I set off for the establishment. Meeting with Ariel Gerard, she told me to rent a room and that we'd talk there privately. The proprietor, Christoph, tells me about the murders and how they've been bad for business. The wandering high elf, Caminalda, approaches me and tells me how scary it is during these times. It's funny that once you know that she's the killer, this conversation is so obvious and implicating for her. Upstairs, Gerard tells me of the plans and I rest at the inn for the night. Getting ready to leave, of course, Caminalda is nowhere to be found down in the main area. A little bit down the road, she jumps out of the bushes and begins attacking me. At this point, I wasn't sure the exact playstyle I wanted to go for. I knew that I wanted most of my quest-based interactions to be stealth kills, or at least initiated by stealth, but I wasn't sure how I felt about open combat. So for now, I just ran back and forth along the Gold Road, as the battle mages and a legionnaire tackled Caminalda. At the beginning of the fight, one of the mage's flame atronachs accidentally hit the legionnaire's horse, and that started a whole tussle between the Empire and the Mages Guild. Well after the serial killer Altmer was defeated, the three of them were still duking it out. Curious to see who would come out on top, I stuck around until the end of the fight. Of course, the Imperial soldier slashed his way through my fellow guildmates, and all I could really do was watch. Looting Caminalda's corpse, I took the key to her room and was pretty excited to see what treasure lay inside. I quickly remembered though that it was a fairly underwhelming bonus. Returning to the guild hall, Carahill promised that she'd write up my recommendation, and finally, the real fun was about to begin. With it though was also the Great Bringle Reset, as I'll call it. Heading to Leywyn next, I spoke with the Gale who asked me to silence the voices for her. Agata told me about the missing Seer Stone and that I should ask around for it. Calthar, one of the more off-putting NPCs in the game, reveals his bitter and angry side. He tells me that Degale's father actually had a stone buried with him. The zany Bosmer then shares the location of the fort with me, and it's now time to get some action in. The walk to Fort Blueblood isn't too far from the city, with only a couple of nuisance creatures on the way. Arriving at the ruins, I laid eyes on my first humanoid enemy and set up the shot. Firing off what I thought was going to be the best sneak attack arrow, it ended up only lowering her health by about 2/5. Every arrow after that didn't do too much damage either, and even worse was my dagger. This was when I decided to redo my character Bringle. The playstyle I wanted to go for wasn't really an option with these stats and gear, so it was back to the drawing board. Of course, I knew that there were other things that could have been altered to balance out the gameplay, like raising my marksman skill, giving myself better gear, or changing sneak to a minor skill and getting to 100 again. However, I wanted to try and be as organic as possible, just so I could get the most fun experience possible. There were a few changes made to my custom class during this time, along with some aesthetics, although those aren't super important. Bringle's profile changed to a slightly younger and more spry wood elf. His star sign stayed the same, and so did his specialization, favorite attributes, and most of his skills. The only one I ended up changing out was Illusion, as I didn't see myself being able to cast Chameleon for a while. I swapped it for Athletics because, to be honest, I wasn't too sure what else to take. And then from there, I was ready to resume the journey. This time, however, there were a few things that I skipped out on doing, both intentionally and unintentionally. I completely forgot to loot the rest of the sewers, so I missed out on some lockpicks and extra arrows. After nearly dying to the bandits outside of Vilverin, I took their gear and forwent going inside of the ruins for more experience. I rejoined the Mages Guild and caught up to exactly where I left off, this time with no skills boosted to unnatural amounts. Outside of Fort Blueblood, I tried to locate that pesky first bandit, but they were nowhere to be found. Deciding to move inside of the fort, my Rambo style of gameplay had begun. Sticking to the shadows and maneuvering around in the dark, the first couple of marauders took more than one shot to take down. This was more than likely due to their heavy armor, but regardless, an extra arrow in their breastplate did the trick. In the next area, I got my first sneak attack takedown, and it was honestly really satisfying to watch. Immediately afterwards, I was spotted by a lone enemy though, and had to resume my flee and shoot strategy. Again, these first few dungeons were meant to gain some skill in stealth and archery. Knowing that I was strapped for gold, I tried my best to loot as much of the efficient equipment as possible, so weapons, armor, potions, gems, etc. Entering into the next zone, Fort Blue Blood Halls, I faced down a mix of marauders that varied in arrow hits to kill. The first encounter took 2 shots, while the next one was an interesting duo. It only took one to assassinate the Altmer, which again, so satisfying, but immediately his partner came running in at me after noticing the kill. This was something that I was going to have to work on for future missions, but luckily, the fellow archer only needed 2 hits to be done in. The next little area actually went really smooth. I silently took down a guard posted on some stairs and lined up a nice shot for another marauder across the way. That was 2 out of 3 enemies defeated, but I knew the last one was a powerful warlord. I tried my best to jump around from the pillars and on little edges along the wall, solely to stay out of reach and to keep things fresh. Finally, after some 360 no-scopes, the orc was down and all that remained was the final room. I looted my arrows back along with a key and went on through the doors. Inside, I shot down one of 2 imps from the shadows and had to directly fight the other one, although it wasn't at all tricky. Looting Manduin's coffin, I found the extra seer stone and prepared myself for the next encounter. I wasn't sure on how I wanted to handle it. I was curious if Glarthir needed to interact with me in order to progress for this next part, or if I could just kill him and take the key. I got in close to the stairwell to trigger his running animations and hid behind a pillar. He reached my spot and just stood in the shadows with me, although the game did register it as me being undetected. I got off an attack on him and our battle began. I'll skip over the fight as it only ended with him going unconscious, so I reverted back, got confronted, and fought him all over again. Even without the element of surprise, I found the brawl with Glarthir easier this time, as every single arrow hit its mark. In no time, he was dead, and I was able to return the amulet back to Degale. Doing so, she wrote off my recommendation, and it was now down to the last one. I was pretty happy with how that first experience went down. I was able to get some decent sneak attacks in with one-shot takedowns, and that's really what I wanted more of. Marauders have better armor and gear than the necromancers do, so there was a lot of promise with this build for this specific questline. In Skingrad, I spoke with Adrienne Barain, and she gave me the task of finding Erthor. Asking around the hall, I collected enough information from Druja and Vig the Cautious, then went on my way. Bleakflat's cave wasn't far off from town, but I knew I was going to have some trouble inside the actual dungeon itself. Pretty much all of the enemies encountered were zombies, and without decent gear or fire abilities, they were going to be a pain to put down. Even with a 3 times damage multiplier, their health bars barely moved at all. Every arrow that pierced their rotting bodies would only result in slivers of health being taken away. Wanting to preserve my arrows, I switched over to the dagger, only to have it deal meaningless amounts of damage. My time through Bleakflat's cave was fairly bleak to say the least. It took a while to move through the dungeon, as the process for defeating the zombies was a repetitive cycle. At one point, I pulled 2 of them at the same time and was worried I'd get overwhelmed. But it really just opened my eyes to how effective bows were for this character compared to daggers, as this was where I put down the blade for good. In terms of being a successful stealth archer, this quest was a pretty bad experience. However, brighter days were soon to come. I located Erthor and told him we could leave the cave together. My question from the original Mages Guild video still stands. Was he practicing necromancy in the cave? He was sent here to do his experiments away from the guild. Was he in over his head for raising the dead and needed a bailout? Who's to say? Regardless, with Erthor safely brought back to the hall, Adrienne assured me she would write my final recommendation. Before leaving, I stole more alchemy supplies from the hall and sold them to Nilwyn and Breville. Following that, I visited a store I've never once set foot in, the Archer's Paradox. I know I'm super late to the party here, but it's definitely neat that they added in a specialized shop for those who want to pursue the path of the marksman. Here, I bought a pretty cheap steel bow and replenished my iron arrows. New weapon in hand, I fast traveled to the Arcane University and met with Raminus Polis. Polis welcomed me to the grounds and set me up with my first task, making a mage's staff. I was pretty excited to finally practice my skills against some necromancers. Arriving at Wellspring Cave, I hid in the shadows as one of them wandered into my view. I fired off my shot and their body flung backwards as the arrow made impact. Again, such an awesome feeling. By the necromancer, I discovered the body of Zarasha and continued onwards. The next 2 takedowns felt equally as rewarding. As I moved towards the exit of the cave, I flew too close to the sun and ended up face to face with the interior's final enemy. Forced to let loose some arrows as he fought back, I managed to still kill him in about 2 or so hits. Leaving the cavern and finding myself out in the waterfront, I fired an arrow at the quickly approaching Noveni Othrin. She was able to conjure her undead and get in close for some attacks. Luckily though, with about 3 arrows, Noveni was dead, and her other 2 lackeys didn't spot me. I was able to perform a stealth takedown on each of them, getting those satisfying one-shot, one-kill moments. After all was said and done, Aletta's body was discovered, and the unfinished mage's staff was obtained. Obviously, this experience was a lot shorter than the 2 previous ones, but to me, it felt like it went a whole lot better. I really enjoyed the silent assassin approach, and without trying to spoil too much, this build does really well for the Mages Guild. Returning back to Raminus, he told me to visit Delmar in the Chironasium in order to complete the staff. Heading over there, I waited until daytime for the Red Guard to make an appearance, but even then, I was struggling to find him. Finally, I looked up the stairs and saw that he had gotten himself into a sticky situation. A warning to everybody currently watching, speaking with him was a bit of a nightmare.
Ah, yes. This is a big step for you, friend, whether you know it or not. Now you'll need to decide what sort of staff you're looking for.
Simultaneously, I tried to pick a decent staff and also tried to get this whole exchange over with, as motion sickness was setting in. I went with a paralyzing effect in case I needed to stop an enemy in their tracks. Waiting 24 hours, Delmar was still flipping out on the staircase until eventually he clipped out of the world and popped up right in front of his colleague. A true magician's trick. Regardless though, my staff was ready and I returned back to Raminus. Mr. Polis promoted me to the rank of Journeyman and then sent me off to retrieve a book from Count Hasseldor of Skingrad. For this one, I wondered what the best strategy was going to be for stealthily taking down Mercator and his companions. I set up the meeting and got myself into position just outside of town. Waiting until 2 AM, Glarthir decided that now was the best time to offer me his PI job. Shooing him away, the trio finally arrived and started to slowly approach. I backed up as far as I could, and soon they lost interest in my whereabouts. They stopped on the quest marker, and I was actually able to hide in the bushes and shoot each of them down one by one. This little workaround is actually really neat and useful, and it's something I'd probably do again going forward. For Mercator, I was worried that attacking him would count as a crime, in case the game still registered him as a friendly NPC. Luckily, it didn't, and one arrow took him down to less than half health. As I kited him around the fields, like Clark Kent himself, Count Hasseldor appeared out of nowhere and threw the best flying right hook I've ever seen. Too bad he missed though, and I was the one to finish off Mercator. The Count and I then had a little chat about how he's not with the Necromancers, that the guild used me as there was never any book, and that next time they should be more direct with what they want from him. Returning to Raminus, he floundered around for a bit trying to explain why the guild was justified in risking my life. Afterwards, he promoted me to the rank of Evoker and sent me to speak with the man himself, Erlov Gerol. Gerol told me about Vatican and how the mages there are struggling to progress further in their research. Before heading there, I sold off some of my loot and stolen goods to Jensine in the market district, and with the gold amassed, I took 2 grand soul gems from a display case in the Archmage's Tower and used one of them to enhance my steel bow. I enchanted it with some fire damage, keeping the area and duration as their defaults and upping the magnitude to 5. I cleverly named it Firebow, and jokes aside, I was really eager to use it. Aside from wanting a more powerful weapon, I also needed something that would take care of any ghosts or spirits found in Vatican. Arriving on site, I looked around for a bit, looting the petty containers, and then wandered up to Scalil near the research area. She expressed her disinterest in the project, explaining how they're stumped on what to do with the pillar. Running over to Denel, I took all of the scrolls in his chest and spoke with the Imperial. He told me how Scalil has the book that could help us solve the puzzle. Getting it from her, I then went around to the 4 tablets in the room and got their translations. If I had actually remembered this part, this would have been an easy step to skip, but I honestly was pretty lost myself. Relearning that I had to cast a Fire, Frost, Fortify Magicka, and Drain Magicka spell, I started using the scrolls only to realize that a Frost one wasn't included. Doing some external research, I located a Snowball scroll in Bruma and retrieved it. With every spell cast, the pillars moved around and it was time to turn into Rambo again. The first enemy I encountered was a ghost, and I felt pretty happy about choosing now to enchant my bow. The next set of ghosts were supposed to be a surprise attack, but remembering this encounter, I backtracked off the pressure plate and retreated into the shadows. Peering around both corners, I fired off an arrow at a small exposed part of the spirit and one-shotted the pair. Attempting to press onwards, I utterly failed at crossing through a trap, and that resulted in my first death. Successfully getting through it this time, I snuck a shot in at another ghost's hand and ended up in the desired chamber. Gaining access to the elevated platform and revealing the alien helm, multiple skeletons spawned and closed in for the attack. Fortunately, they decided to just stand around the base of the platform, making for easy target practice. A few ghosts also appeared near where I pressed the first button, but they were also a one-shot, one-kill scenario. Exiting the ruins, I brought the helm over to Scalil, who then told me to present it to Jirol right away. Returning to the university, Erlov was ecstatic about the discovery, and Raminus got straight into his last task for me. He explained the increasing necromancer threat and determined that it was time the guild looks into their production of black soul gems. He promoted me to the rank of Conjuror, and from there, I sought out Tarmina within the Mystic Archives. Tarmina was pretty standoffish and busy at first, but once she heard what I was there for, she let up a bit. She told me about the book, Necromancer's Moon, which was previously taken out by Falcar. She knows it's around the archive somewhere, but isn't sure on its exact spot. Looking around briefly, I found it on one of these side tables in the corner and brought it over to Raminus. He mentioned the shade of the remnant celestial phenomenon and directed me to Bothiel over in the tower to get more information. Speaking with her, she tells me that she recently read about it in one of Falcar's displaced notes. Bringing the note to Polis, he specifically points out the Dark Fissure, south of Shadenhall, as being a point of interest. Before heading out on my next adventure, I paid a visit to the Slash and Smash in order to sell some items and repair others. With fresh gear in hand, I traveled over to Vatican and ascended to the Dark Fissure. A pretty cool detail that I've never noticed before was the beam of light that shines down on the altar. I wasn't sure if it was always like that, or if perhaps this was the day the celestial event would occur. Regardless, I got in close to it and noticed a necromancer standing right behind. I tried to get in close while staying out of sight, but every time I crossed a certain threshold, he would see me and begin attacking. I tried approaching from different angles, and even with the one I felt the most hidden, he was still somehow able to spot me. It was a fight I certainly could have taken head on, but I really wanted to use the element of surprise. So I waited until nightfall for more darkness, but he had actually retreated back into the cave. Following behind, he was standing right near the entrance and had apparently already seen me. Thinking it was over, I took one step backwards and fell back to being undetected, which was perfect. I got a sneak attack in for about 1/3 of his health, and the battle had begun. He conjured in a ghost, which body blocked for him pretty nicely. Oddly enough, he fell back into the cave a bit more and started attacking another necromancer. I have no idea how they aggroed onto each other, but it worked out in my favor, and soon, the worm anchorite was defeated. On his person, he had a handwritten note, which, when picked up, gave me the go-ahead to return back to the university. Running back outside, the frenemy necromancer followed, and with a few shots from my bow, she too was killed. Fast traveling back to Raminus, I told him how they're using the stars and altars to transform the black soul gems. He fears for their power and numbers, but puts that to the side for now. Raminus promotes me to the rank of magician and informs me that Hannibal Travin, the archmage, will be giving me my tasks from now on. So far, the stealth archer / assassin build has been a lot of fun to play with and has proven to be really effective. Of course, not all of my runs and quests so far have been extremely successful, but the ones that have gone well, I'd say were definitely some of my better moments. It feels like there's a lot of control with this build, and it requires a little more observational skills and awareness of my surroundings than, say, a warrior build. And honestly, it's a nice change of pace. Most of my initial concerns have been taken care of for now, with enemy grouping not being too much of an issue, and my quantity of arrows not really waning. Continuing with the quest line, I sought out and spoke with Travin. His first task for me was to search for and rescue his necromancer informant, Musianus Elias. He's currently inside the ruins of Nenyan Twill, and there are battle mages purging the place as we speak. Traveling to the waterfront and walking my way to the Alien Ruin, I entered inside and encountered one of my favorite NPC interactions.
You! What are you doing here? Has the council gone mad, sending you here alone? There's no time. The others, they were waiting for us. They knew we were coming. I'm the only one left. The necromancers retreated further in, but we've got to follow them. There's no time to waste. Follow me.
I really do wonder if there's any way at all to save Fithragar. Maybe with some crazy buff spells, but it seems like no matter what, he was always destined to die in the spike trap. Regardless, facing the necromancers and undead were the least of my worries at this point. Somehow, I had attracted the attention of an ogre, and it tracked me all the way in here. I flailed around for a bit, desperately trying to get it off my tail. I tried to kill it in the spike trap, but it was really hard to match up the mechanism with the ogre's movements. Eventually, I realized that it didn't have that much health, and my bow was able to do some decent damage towards it. I was kind of scarred from facing ogres for the Fighters Guild playthrough that I forgot they aren't super scary and challenging foes. With that interaction behind me, I carried on through the ruin and came across some easier targets. There were plenty more necromancers and skeletons that would go down with one shot, and the satisfaction of it all continued. I find alien ruins easier to sneak around in than say caves or forts. This part could be my imagination, but it seems like they also have more shadows for the player to linger around in, but that part is probably unlikely. Maybe it's because the lit areas are more obvious than the fires and braziers within the caves and forts. In any case, the first zone of Nenyan Twill was a breeze to get past. The second zone brought me right in front of Mariette Riel. Instead of letting her approach me, I got off a cheap shot which almost killed her, but she pretty much entirely healed up and gave me a tough time. Just past her was the final area. It consisted of enemies that were spaced out and relatively easy to hit from long distances. One of the skeleton kills alerted a necromancer beside it, but upon running in close, she only took 2 arrows to defeat. I continued to move through the open room until finally, just about every enemy was defeated. I lowered the false wall, discovered a zombified Musianus, and then left the ruins. On the way out, I wasn't very careful and alerted the final necromancer. However, 3 arrows in her torso did the trick, and I was free and clear to return to the university. Travis was shocked to hear the news of Elias, and then told me to ask Raminus for a promotion. Ascending to the rank of Warlock, Travin then sent me off to Skingrad in order to meet with the Count again. Before doing so, I sold off some of my stolen goods and bought some more arrows at the Archer's Paradox. I was desperately awaiting the arrival of steel arrows, but they wouldn't come for quite some time. Traveling to the West Weald, I waited around for Janus, who told me he had some news. However, in order to get it out of him, he wanted me to clear out the vampires in Bloodcrust Cavern, as well as get rid of the hunters who have set up shop in the city. This was a quest I was actually pretty excited for, as the circuit of Bloodcrust Cavern is pretty perfect for stealth archers. I went ahead and sought out Eridor, the leader of the hunters. I wasn't sure what role I wanted them to play in this whole quest, whether they would go in and do the dirty work, or if I would kill them separately. Regardless, I sent them off to the cave, but not before I could get an early visit in. Deciding to do things for myself, I began my walkthrough in the shadows. Some of the vampires went down with a single shot, while others took more than a few to bring down. I think the spellcasters and less armored NPCs were affected a lot more by the sneak attacks, as even some unarmored melee users tanked the arrows. At one point, one of the vampires got a good swing at me with their claymore, causing me to contract porphyric hemophilia, my most feared disease. It's a very irrational fear, as I know it can easily be cured, and I have 3 days to do it, but for some reason, I get this sense of panic when it happens. Maybe it's because I'm worried that I'll forget about the disease and 3 days will go by, I'm really not sure. Regardless, I'd say most of the vampires in here went down with 2 to 3 arrows, even with the sneak attack multiplier. The fire enchantment on my bow certainly helps do the trick with killing them though, and eventually all of them were eliminated. It wasn't as successful of a run as previous dungeons, but I did what I could with what I had. Just as I was about to leave, the hunters had showed up and were making their way out of the cave. I still had to deal with them for Hasseldor, so as Eridor's 3 men left, I tagged him from the back and shot him down by the entrance. Leaving, the 3 goons had no idea what had happened, so I just began firing on them. Luckily, because I was far away from the city limits, my actions didn't count as crimes, and I used the old back up and shoot trick. They really weren't much more difficult than the vampires, save for maybe the Nord for some reason. Soon though, the 3 of them were dead, and I was able to get the information out of the Count. He warned me to tell the guild of Amanda Marco's return and the rising forces of the Necromancers. Traven was shocked to hear at the return of this age-old enemy and said that the guild needed some time to decide on what to do. Waiting around for a couple of days, the Archmage finally informed me of the council's progress, which wasn't much, but sidetracked it all with a new task. Apparently, the Bruma Guildhall has gone silent, and that's pretty abnormal for Jean Forsoric. He wants me to travel north and check in on everything over there. This was also one of the quests that I had made a mental note for. I knew the enemies were going to be slightly tougher than necromancers, and that a stealth approach was going to be tricky to achieve. Entering inside of the Guildhall, my heart sank a little when I saw that I had to deal with more zombies. There was no way I was able to one-shot them, and what's worse, I was spotted right away. So, I figured for this one, why not do the opposite of stealth archery and get the whole city involved? I pulled some of the undead out and let the town put some work in. After all, they're the ones who let the necromancers slip in and out, resulting in the Guildhall's demise. I had repeatedly tried to re-enter inside of the hall and get some sneak attacks in, but almost every single time, a zombie would end up rounding the corner and surprise attack me. Luckily, there were some easier enemies in here like skeletons that could be crushed with around 2 or so arrows. The process of sneaking and getting caught right away would continue on for some time. My best way to combat multiple zombies in tight quarters and save on arrows was to just bring them outside and let the guards take care of them, and if I could, get some pot shots in. Otherwise, if it was just one attacker, I'd try my best for the flee and shoot method. Eventually, I made it to Jean's office and I was anticipating the necromancer encounter. I slowly snuck up the stairs and cracked open the door. Camilla Lollia was standing right in front of me facing the other direction. I let off a perfect arrow right at her back, which almost killed her, but unfortunately, she healed and I was forced to go through her dialogue anyways. The rest of the fight went pretty sound. She tried to throw a few punches at me, but 3 arrows in her sternum did the trick. Afterwards, Jaskar popped out, he told me that this was Mana Marco's doing, and together we returned to the Imperial City. Not my best efforts as a stealth archer, but sometimes you have to just roll with what you're given. Reporting back to Hannibal Traven, he said that the council needed some time to digest this information. In the meantime, I got promoted to the rank of wizard from Raminus Polis. After enough time passed, Traven told me that in a state of panic and hot-headedness, Erlov Giral took the Bloodworm Helm to Fort Telemann, and Karanya took the Necromancer's Amulet to Fort Ontis. He'd like me to go and retrieve the artifacts, along with the mages themselves. Before doing all of that, I sold some of my loot and Mages Guild goods off to the local merchants, and then paid another visit to the Archer's Paradox. This time, I went ahead and bought myself a fine iron bow, which had the same attack power as the steel bow. From here, I went over to the Mages Guild Chironasium and made an improved version of the firebow. This time, it dealt 10 fire damage and could be shot around 115 or so times. Appropriately, this one was named Flamebow. The first of the 2 quests I embarked on was the Necromancer's Amulet. From Bleakflat's cave, I traveled to Fort Ontis and prepared my battle plans. I knew that an assault was going to go down as soon as I spoke with Karanya. I tried to make mental note of where every single quote-unquote Mages Guild member was so I could lurk through the hallways and get my shots ready. As soon as I reached the chamber Karanya was in, I scrapped my original idea and thought of an even better one. I first tried it out with an Altmer in one of the corridors and it worked fantastically. Because the mages aren't my enemies yet, I was able to stealthily shoot them down in the hallways and no one batted an eye. There was no risk if they saw me, as they couldn't do anything about it or alert their allies. Honestly, I had no idea that this was even an option, and going forward, I figured why not do this every time I want to play through this questline. I shot down all of Karania's goons like the game was on easy mode, and then I made my approach for her. Crouching in the darkness, I let off a lone arrow that struck her in the back and brought her HP down by about 1/6. Karania was actually a pretty tricky fight. I remembered having problems fighting her with my high-level warrior, so a lowly archer who can't aim was definitely going to have some issues. Plus, she was very fidgety and moved around a lot, so that made for an even better time trying to tag her. After a long and hard-fought battle, I readied myself for victory as the last arrow pierced her, only to see that she would just get knocked unconscious. As it turns out, I had to speak with her first in order to make her non-essential. So I restarted the whole fight and actually died on my first real attempt. She brought her A game with the destruction magic and summoned a wraith to fight by her side instead of the skeleton. The next attempt went a lot better. She twitched and zigzagged a lot, making it hard for me to land hits, but luckily, if she backed up, there was no support for her from the other necromancers. Karania also had an annoying habit of healing a lot. Every arrow that hit its mark resulted in her healing her wounds and practically negated any damage that I had done to her. Finally, after a bit of time, she was defeated and I was able to snag the Necromancer's amulet. I chose to leave through a new way, which was sort of pointless as I had killed most of the Necromancers blocking the original exit. This path out resulted in more fights and encounters with enemies. But regardless, I had made it out of the fort safely and returned the artifact back to Traven. It's funny because I feel like every quest that the Archmage makes me go on results in him being in disbelief for the information that I just gave to him. Every single one, he's shocked to hear whatever news I deliver. You'd think by now he would have caught on that the guild was down on their luck. Anyways, the next task was retrieving the Bloodworm Helm, and it brought me all the way out to Fort Telemann, northeast of Leyawiin. For this one, I knew that it was going to be an easier approach for a stealth archer, as it was the usual guards posted and patrolling type of dungeon. On the outside, I took out a necromancer in silence, but caught the attention of a skeleton archer. 2 quick hits though and it was defeated. Entering inside of the fort, I tried to pay extra attention to corners, hallways, and side rooms. I made slow advancements, mapping out each area and listening for footsteps and chatter. Again, it was a really cool way to play through this game. It's such a far off style from what I'm used to, and it feels like a very refreshing take on Oblivion itself. In terms of success as a stealth archer, Fort Telemann felt textbook and practically elementary compared to what I had to deal with in the past. Necromancers were spaced out evenly, and they were mostly placed out in the open. The second zone, Order of the Black Rose, had a mix of necromancers and Daedra duking it out with one another. So I let them kill each other off before I advanced through the rest of the area. By the end of it all, I only needed to shoot down a stunted Scamp and a Dremora. Oddly enough, the Scamp was a tougher opponent than the fully kitted out Dremora Churl. Once all was said and done, I pried the helm off of Jirol's dead body and returned it to Traven at the university. From there, I spoke with Raminus and he promoted me to the rank of Master Wizard, the second highest rank in the guild, just under Archmage. Talking with Hannibal again, he gave me my second last quest of securing the colossal black soul gem from Cylorn. I charged and repaired my weapons in the city, then made my way over to the Ayleid ruins. For this one, I knew that Falcar and his groupies did a walk of shame outside for a bit before he flees back into the ruins. My goal was to intercept him, or get one solid kill shot off so I could expedite this whole process. I spoke with the battle mages, got them set up in their preferred places, and then made my way around the side of the ruins. My first attempt, I missed and absolutely nailed one of his followers. This caused Falcar to bolt back inside of the ruin. For my second attempt, I completely missed and decided to just wait for the battle mages to intervene. From there, I tried to block off Falcar's escape. I was sort of successful, but I quickly realized that it was pointless as his health was way beyond anything that my sneak attacks could have lowered down. Ignoring the battle outside, I followed him through the dungeon and began my stealth takedowns. My Cylorn experience was sort of similar to my time in Nenyon Twill. The necromancers were spaced out, their placements predictable, and they were pretty easy to one-shot. I soon found myself in the second zone, Cylorn Biroseli. Here, I took down one more necromancer before running into Falcar. Unfortunately, he had some horrible placement, as he was facing the doorway, which was completely lit up, and he spotted me immediately. Either way, our battle had begun, and Falcar was certainly a lot weaker, health-wise, than he was outside. Similar to Karanya, he was a fidgety elf and strafed a lot, completely dodging most of my arrows. Halfway through our fight, he wandered too far into another room, so I decided to fall back a bit. He fell for the bait, and this time around, he didn't have as much spring in his step. Soon, enough arrows pierced his flesh, and Falcar was defeated. Snagging the colossal black soul gem, I fled the ruin and brought it back to Traven. Getting right into the last task for me, Hannibal said that I alone had to face Mana Marco. He named me the guild's new archmage, and then sacrificed himself by trapping his soul inside of the gem. I always chuckle thinking about this from Raminus Pulse's perspective. He's probably been in the guild for years, did everything that Traven asked, and his life's work was probably to run the guild. All of a sudden, a schmo comes along and goes from associate to archmage in 3 days, completely undermining his plans. In order to honor Hannibal and the guild, I left him naked on the ground and swapped out my armor for his robe. In preparation for the final dungeon crawl, I recharged my bows, bought some health potions, repaired my gear, and made one final trip to the Archer's Paradox. To my delight, Daneland finally had some steel arrows for sale. Buying over 100 of them, I was ready to take on the King of Worms himself. This was also technically my last attempt at stealth takedowns and sneak attacks. I wanted this one to go really smoothly, just so I could end on a good note. On the way to Echo Cave, I encountered a pretty strange sight. 2 legionnaires were shooting at each other. I assume one of them missed a deer and struck the other, and now I was here to loot the arrows off of whoever lost. This little tussle went on for some time, but eventually a winner was crowned and I moved on. Arriving outside the caverns, I spotted the doorman, Bolor Savel, and got a pretty good sneak attack in. It didn't kill him, but he did charge in at me with his melee weapon, making it easy to finish him off. Grabbing his key, I entered inside, and Rambo's final mission had begun. There was a mix of a few skeletons and necromancers in the first area. I did pretty well for myself for the most part. There was one spot where I got too complacent and was seen by an enemy, but one shot with the flame bow and she was dead. The chasms soon came next, and the skeletons patrolling there were easy targets. Most of this space was shrouded in darkness, making it really easy to sneak around. Again, most of my success can be attributed to the fact that the necromancers don't have any armor. If they did, then a lot of these one-shot takedowns wouldn't work, and I'd be out a lot more arrows and potions. The first zone was smooth sailing, and soon I was brought to the Echo Passages. There were a couple more chasms here, containing more skeletons, which were just as simple to deal with. It was a lot shorter of a crawl than the previous area, and soon I was on to the final zone of the Necromancer's Chambers. Standing outside of the doorway was a Necromancer Adept, which also only took one shot to kill. Now, all that was left was Mana Marco himself. I thought for a fact that the stealth attack against him was going to be so satisfying and effective. After all, he's in a big chamber, standing out in the open. I found the perfect area to line up my shot, I knocked my arrow and let it loose. Of course, the arrow went straight through him. Thinking I had missed at first, I tried again, and still the same result. I went through a variety of different angles and wasted a bunch of ammunition. It was here that I had given up on the dream of a stealth takedown and confronted the King of Worms head on.
I see Bolor was unsuccessful in delaying you. Very well. I shall reanimate him once we are done here. Perhaps we shall chat for a while, since you really have no other options. I must say, I expected Archmage Traven, rather than his star pupil. I am disappointed to see that he could not face me himself. I have met so many of his predecessors over the years. I developed a particular fondness for Galerion, ill-preserved though he may be. But here you are instead, skilled enough to make it this far, which speaks volumes about you. Perhaps you'll be as useful to me as Traven would. Oh, my dear, I didn't mean to imply that you have a choice. I will make you another in a long tradition of worm thralls, and take my time in studying you. Your very soul will be forfeit to me. Power, my dear friend. I seek power. And so I acquire and study those who have some degree of it. We are after the same things, your guild and I. Yet you worry about good and evil, and do not accept they are manifestations of the same thing. So you brand me a villain, and make vain attempts to destroy me. I watch, and I wait, and I collect you when you come for me. Instead of drawing Traven out, I have received you instead. Perhaps I shall personally go and collect him when we are done here.
The conversation ends and the battle begins. Mannimarco summons a spirit to aid him in the fight and pulls out a dagger. He was able to hit me for a lot of health, and I was popping potions left, right, and center. I tried my best to kite him around the small area, keeping my distance and firing off some arrows as I went along. Anytime one of his destruction spells hit, chunks of my HP would get taken out. Eventually, after some time maneuvering around the battlefield, I figured out a decent strategy. I hopped onto one of the pillars and started jumping up and down. This worked well for spacing out his melee attacks, for avoiding the ghost spells, and for avoiding his destruction magic. After some time of lodging arrows into his skull and sternum, the King of Worms, Mannimarco, was defeated. And that just about wraps up the Mages Guild questline whilst playing as a stealth archer. From here, Raminus is spoken with, and there are a few more benefits given to the player. So, that was my first time trying out this playstyle, and here are my thoughts on the sneaky marksman approach. I loved playing through Oblivion like this. It was such a nice switch up from my usual brutish bruiser playstyle. It made me slow down, examine my surroundings, and make calculated moves based on enemy placement. Usually, archery makes it into my major skills rotation, as I like the use of ranged attacks, but it never really gets utilized much beyond pulling in targets for a fight. So, to solely depend on it for my offense felt pretty odd at first, but quickly became very comfortable. As for stealth, I really only enjoy doing it when there's an attack multiplier aspect attached. I've never really enjoyed sneaking past enemies, and only really use it for nefarious purposes. I'd prefer to leave no NPC behind and defeat them as I go along. So, to be able to systematically eliminate them through stealth means is totally fine and fun for me, but otherwise, it isn't my forte. As for changes I'd make, there really isn't much besides putting some more effort and skill points into illusion and intelligence. Since speed isn't really necessary for this playstyle, I'd consider switching it out for intelligence, but it's something I'd have to play around with. It would have been fun to get to use a variety of bows and arrows, which are provided at higher levels, and that's maybe something I'd be interested in doing for the future. If you'd like to see more random playthroughs for quests and whatnot with my boy Bringle, feel free to let me know. Also, coming up for actual challenge runs is the Dark Brotherhood, No Killing, and Main Quest Tutorial Goblin Staff only. If you have any further suggestions, feel free to let me know down below, and until next time, keep on adventuring. Caius Cosades, the man, the myth, the legend. Caius is one of the main NPCs in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind who actively helps and mentors the player. At first, he seems kind of odd. He's an older imperial male who stands around shirtless in his home all day and has a crippling skooma addiction. However, we soon come to learn that Caius is a man of many talents. He's a Grand Spymaster for the Blades, making him the highest ranking member in Vvardenfell at the time. He's a trained monk and offers services in hand-to-hand, speechcraft, and unarmored, all up to level 70. Perhaps the most impressive, Caius is very well connected. He has contacts all over Vvardenfell. They stretch far and wide, from connections in major cities to the oddballs on secluded farms and ranches. He gives the Nerevarine a lot of advice, gold, items, and overall, general aid in their mission to defeat Glarthir and the Sixth House. Perhaps one of the biggest tragedies in Morrowind is Caius' ending. After locating Mehra Milo and the Lost Prophecies, and just before starting the 3rd, 4th, and 5th trials, he drops some heavy news on the player. He says that he's being recalled back to the Imperial City in order to discuss his skooma problems as well as politics within the capital. He foreshadows that the Emperor's health is declining and that there's going to be major turmoil within the next couple of years regarding his succession. As he disappears from the game forever, he wishes the player luck on their journey to becoming Nerevarine. Well, as it turns out, according to some very legitimate sources, Caius arrived in the Imperial City, took care of his business, and then, a couple of years later, enlisted in the arena in order to become Grand Champion. So that's not really true, but for today, we're going to pretend that it is, and we're going to see if Caius Cosades can beat Cyrodiil's arena in the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. As an homage to Caius, I created him as my character in the game. I did my darndest to get him to look similar to the grizzled spy master we see in Morrowind, perhaps with a little more age to him. The looks were pretty easy to attain, however, it was his class, skills, and birth sign that were more concerning. Luckily, thanks to the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, we're able to know exactly what Caius' build was, minus the birth sign. As mentioned before, he's Morrowind's version of a monk, so that includes a specialization in stealth, favorite attributes of agility and willpower, major skills of hand-to-hand, unarmored, athletics, acrobatics, and sneak, then minor skills of block, marksman, light armor, restoration, and blunt weapons. However, Oblivion's monk class is slightly different. The specialization and favorite attributes are the same, but the major skills are changed up a bit. Since there are 7 major skills in Oblivion and only 5 in Morrowind, the selected ones are security, sneak, acrobatics, marksman, alteration, hand-to-hand, and athletics. Going ahead with those, I then moved on to Caius' birth sign, which I struggled to pick. There aren't any tip-offs for what it is in Morrowind, so wanting at least one bone thrown to me, I picked the warrior in order to help with my combat. As far as Caius' inventory goes, at most he has skooma, some gold, and maybe the odd potion or two. He doesn't fight with weapons or wear armor. So, for this arena run, hand-to-hand was going to be my main source of dealing damage, and since I have to wear some sort of raiment, I figured I'd go with the light armor when I got there. According to the wiki, Caius knows a lot of spells. Almost all of them are to resist some kind of element or attack type though. The two that I would consider using down the line are Absorb Health as well as Absorb Fatigue. Now, one of Caius' most notable traits is his addiction to sugar. His house looks like a college dorm as there's pipes, moon sugar, skooma, everything that a Tamriel addict would need. What better place to acquire some of the goods than Breville? Caius would obviously be well connected and probably would have made the acquaintance of those living in the skooma den. Unfortunately, they don't like to share, so he would have to steal some bottles for himself. Formalities aside, there's one last thing that needs to be done before joining the arena. In Morrowind, Caius Cosades is actually level 25. He's earned his stripes as Grand Spy Master, and his skills and traits reflect that. So I figured I'd give it the old blades try and mirror his abilities to the best of mine. I wouldn't put too much love and passion on this build though, as you'll soon see why. But for those who would like to hear the data, Caius Prime's final form goes as follows. He's an Imperial monk with the birth sign of the warrior. He's level 25, his total health is 292, which is actually too much, as Morrowind puts it at just over 200. However, there's no unarmored skill, and he has nothing going for him in terms of light armor. His magicka is only 80, which is in fact too little, as it's apparently 118. His fatigue is 224. As for attributes, his strength and endurance are level 75. Intelligence is 40, willpower is 35, agility is 59, speed is 40, personality is 50, and luck is 60. Moving on to major skills, athletics, hand-to-hand, and acrobatics are level 70. Alteration is level 25, marksman is 30, security is 55, and sneak is 30. As for minor skills, none of them have been altered except for speechcraft, which is 70. It appears as though Caius' greatest asset is his charm, so I figured might as well boost that up. If you know anything about the arena, you probably know that this isn't going to be an efficient build at level 25, but Caius is him and he's ready for anything, or so I thought. Signing up with Owen and entering for my first match, I saw the yellow team combatant had glass equipment and got pretty nervous. Popping a skooma at the beginning, I went rushing in. Immediately, I noticed how little my opponent's health was moving down and knew this wasn't going to end well. Heavy attacks seemed to be the best bang for my buck in this situation, Especially with her range, speed, and damage dealt, getting in quickly and slipping out wasn't really an option. My saving grace, however, was being able to knock her down a couple of times. In those moments, I could pummel her with my quick jabs and take down some of her health. The fight was getting down to the wire, as her HP was probably at a quarter, but I knew that it was over. I had a sliver left, and there wasn't really a way for me to hit her without getting hit back. Pulling back her arm, she slung it forward, slashing Caius, ending the Imperial Grand Spymaster's life. Or so she thought. Trying again, I slugged back some skooma and showed no mercy. My fists were flying, I was throwing my 1, 2, 3, 4 combos, and my knuckles were bruising up against her glass shield. She, however, also came to play and hacked my health way down. The fight was once again over, and Caius would never again be able to return to Vardenfell. Or so everyone thought. At this point, the writing should have been on the wall, but I wanted to keep going. This time, Caius came prepared with some health potions. He's level 25 and has a rather prestigious position in the Empire. I would think he would have had a handful of consumables on him. This time, my plan was to slip in, throw a heavy attack, and slip out. It was actually working, and combined with knocking her down, things were turning up Cosades. At one point, the yellow team combatant healed herself, and I was worried all my progress was for nothing. Fortunately, her regeneration was only minor, and I could match it with slamming back a health pot. The fight continued onwards, and we were neck and neck. Finally, after throwing continuous double fisters, she went down and the match was over. Caius had won his first fight as a pit dog, after multiple non-canon defeats. I was feeling pretty good in the moment and just about ready for anything. Then came the next opponent. He came out with an ebony longsword, ebony shield, a Daedric helm, and heavy raiment. He dealt even more damage to me, and his health was going down even slower than the last combatants. The fight went horribly, as did the next one, and the next one, and the next one. It felt pretty hopeless. Even after slugging back skooma, which really is only for the immersion, and 4 strong potions of healing, he would beat me at every turn. My insane acrobatic skill didn't really help much, even though I was able to reach some pretty impressive heights with them. The one thing I did learn from this run though was that my blocks were actually able to stagger my opponent. I didn't think they would do anything beyond cutting down on some of the direct damage, but I was wrong. It was through this newfound observation and a few more banked health potions that I was able to bring myself to victory. My new strategy was this. I would analyze his attacks and react appropriately. If they were heavy attacks, I would get out of there as quickly as possible. If they were light attacks though, I would block them and then go in for the DK smash attack. When he staggered, I would unleash a fury of jabs and get in as many licks as possible. Finally, through many repetitions and 8 strong health potions, he was bested, and that was my second fight completed. Believe me though, it still wasn't lost on me that these were only the pit dog matches. The next battle was against an Argonian archer, and I mean, come on. At first, I wanted to evade his arrows using my acrobatics and athletics, but the guy could shoot. So I just got up in his face and relentlessly pounded on him. No skooma, no health potions, just straight gas from Caius, and the advancement match was won. My first fight as a brawler went pretty well. Using light attacks, I could chip away at his health, and similar to the same strategy as match number 2, I would try my best to block at the right times. Kudos to the yellow team combatant, he put up a decent fight. Forced to slug back my final 2 health potions, I had him on the ropes. Left jab, right cross, hook, uppercut, hit after hit, punch after punch, the Nord soon lay dead on the floor, and Caius was once again victorious. Now, at this point, I was feeling pretty guilty that I had all of these strong health potions at my disposal. I wasn't exactly earning them, and even though Caius probably could get his hands on a lot of them, and by level 25 they are a dime a dozen, it still didn't feel right. As learned through my Conjuror challenge, health potions win fights, and I didn't want this playthrough to be about how many potions I would need to consume per fight. The final nail in the coffin was the second match for Brawler rank. This was the first fight where I had to face more than one combatant. It was the 2 Wood Elf sisters, and while one came charging in with a Dwarven Claymore, the other stayed back and let loose a flurry of arrows. It already would have taken me an eternity to win against one melee fighter, but couple that with an archer? Maybe the real Caius could have handled this, but not great value Caius. The most I could do was charge in and single out the archer. She was the easier of the 2 to beat, and her attacks were less frequent. Of course, her claymore-wielding sister would follow me around and swing for the fences. so it wasn't exactly a walk in the park. Even after chugging multiple health potions, the fight was pretty difficult to win, and like mentioned before, I didn't want the consumables to carry this playthrough. Throwing in the towel, great value, level 25, skills sort of matching the real Caius Cosades was officially retired. In his place came Dollar Tree, level 1, fresh from the sewers, still a skooma addict, Caius Cosades. Going through the first 4 matches again, I would say they were more appropriate for this build and its inception, if that makes sense. I didn't need to use any health potions, and the pit dogs were falling rather easily, yet they were still hitting pretty hard and getting my health down to low amounts. Match number 2 was still tricky, and he still killed me a few times. The archer though was fine, I mean again, come on. And for the 4th match, Caius got his butt handed to him right away. The Nord came rushing out and cast some form of frost spell on me, immediately lowering my HP to less than half. From there, I knew that everything was not coming up Millhouse, and he made quick work of me. It almost felt like newbie match 2 of Brawler was trickier than God mode undeserving level 25 match 2 of Brawler. Fortunately though, I got pretty lucky with attempt number 2, as he didn't use any of his game-ending moves. Lunging in, getting a ground pound off, and lunging out, the Nord didn't last very long with these combos, and soon I was caught up to where I had previously left off. With my earnings from the arena, Caius paid a quick visit to the Gilded Carafe and bought a whopping 3 weak potions of Restore Health. In order to get into the right mindset, Cosades also mellowed out with his people at the den and sucked back on that sweet sugar. Back to the fighting, the next match was the infamous Double Bossmer Brawl. For this attempt, I singled out the sword fighter first and beat her down. She was able to deal a decent amount of damage to me, knocking my health down to about 1/3, but ultimately, I was able to defeat her by staying behind a pillar, rendering her sister useless. Then came the archer fight. I assumed this one was going to be easy, because I mean, come on. But given my health and her steady hands, it seemed like every arrow found its mark. She would fire her shot, drop my health down by quite a bit, back up, and repeat the process. I was just barely able to deliver the killing blow, and Caius lived to fight another match. In fact, the next one was the advancement match. This battle was with the Khajiit who used a 2-handed battle axe. He wore a heavy raiment and had a chainmail helm. His health wasn't going down very easily, and his heavy attacks were working wonders on mine. At one point, I had to slam back my last health pot, as well as my last bottle of skooma. Right after that though, the Khajiit almost completely healed, and I was pretty scared for Caius' life. The battle raged on for a bit, Cosades with only but a sliver of health. I did an okay job at following the fundamentals. Keep my distance, lunge in, leap out, keep an eye out for heavy attacks, etc. The turning point in the fight was when I got a couple of lucky punches in and staggered him multiple times in a row. Letting loose the flurry of hits, the Khajiit went down, and that was another victory. It now felt like the right time to expand my combat abilities. As once mentioned, Morrowind Caius knows some absorb health spells. So I looked up who was selling a novice version of it, and I was brought to Thoron of the Anvil Mages Guild. Purchasing the spell for 70 gold, I then used the remainder of Cosades' earnings to buy 2 more health potions. The next 2 matches went off without a hitch. My newfound absorption spell wasn't the greatest for giving me extra health, but it was at least decent at draining my opponents. Alternating attacks on the Redguard Bloodletter led to a rather easy victory. The next one, however, was a little trickier. The combatant had some protection spells cast on her. My absorb health spell wasn't really doing anything, but at the same time, every hit that I landed, there seemed to be some sort of force around her that glowed. She had heavy armor on, which at this point, when I see that, means that I'm in for a tough time. We were pretty neck and neck for most of the battle in terms of HP, but I usually have to work harder to get to that point. Consuming my 2 health pots brought me back in, and the fight continued on. Finally, after landing 1 good smash attack on her shield, she went down and it was on to the next fight. Having some winnings saved up, Caius spat out 3 more potions from Peric. Little did he know though that he wouldn't really be needing them. The next fight was against an archer sword fighter hybrid, and I mean, come on. He came out of the gates, bow in hand, ready to let loose his arrows. Caius, however, pressed the attack, got up in his face, and took it like a champ. Relentlessly beating on the Dark Elf likely reminded him about his exile from Vardenfell, and probably made him even more enraged. The Dunmer tried to switch to his sword and board, but it was too late. Cosades had beat him to a pulp. The next fighter was against the Bosmer wielding Shimmer Strike. It was actually a pretty interesting battle. He was the first opponent who had a range similar to mine, so we both needed to get up close in order to inflict some damage. Shimmer Strike's enchantments were taking a toll on my health, and for a little bit, things were looking bleak. However, I caught a lucky break when the Wood Elf fell to the ground, and I was able to repeatedly punch down on him. Caius' cover story of becoming the Grand Champion was looking more and more real as time went on. The next match was against a Wood Elf in light armor using a sword and board. She might have been the easiest fight yet, barring maybe some of the archers, but I mean, come on. She couldn't get Cosades' health down to even a quarter. Meanwhile, her HP was dropping faster than a Warhammer wielding Bosmer's fatigue. Up next was an orc in heavy armor, swinging around a battle axe. Something about his attack pattern seemed really predictable. It might have been him taking a long time to let off his heavy attacks, or perhaps his tendency to stand around and take my punches. In any case, it worked at making me feel like I didn't have to try as hard. With my guard down, the fight came down to the wire, and through the luck of staggering, I was able to unleash my finishing combo. The next battle was against a Nord warrior. I never noticed how surprisingly similar she looked to the yellow team's champion, so it felt extra fulfilling to beat her. We were pretty evenly matched, going swing for swing with our attacks. If anything, I was kind of standing in one spot while she was the one to move around the pit, making me turn and swivel. As mentioned prior, whenever Caius and the opponent are neck and neck, that usually means that I have to pop some health potions in order to keep up. Doing so, moments later, I let off the final punch and ended the match. The next fighter was actually my first spellcasting opponent. I wasn't sure how my modified monk build was going to handle it, but things went pretty decently. I found the main trick was to just stay away from her destruction magic. Her sword fighting abilities were pretty lousy, but I knew for a fact if she hit me with her fire spells, that would be at least half of my health gone. Throwing around my jabs and crosses, I was able to drop her a few times and get some free hits in. Finally, to end the fight, I gave her a taste of her own medicine and sapped her health down to 0. Caius was feeling pretty good right now, and on top of the world. It felt like nothing could get in my way, and that I was destined to fight against Agronacro Malog. That was until I stepped into the pit with my next opponent. It was the advancement match, and boy oh boy, Owen wasn't kidding when he said this was the most blood-crazed orc he had ever seen. Testing her abilities at first, she came out swinging her glass warhammer with her orcish helm and her heavy armor. Her first 2 hits dropped me to below half health. I threw a few hooks and uppercuts in there, but I was no match and she flattened me in 20 seconds. Realizing I'd have to gear up for this one, I went back to the Gilded Carafe and bought a few more health potions. From there, I wanted to try out a new spell and see how much it would benefit me, Absorb Fatigue. Thoron at the Anvil Mages Guild Hall had it for sale at a pretty cheap price. Trying again, this time I focused on sapping her fatigue and staying out of her Warhammer's path. It seemed to work well, and maybe this detail was a placebo of some kind, but she almost seemed to be moving slower. In any case, she still hit like a truck, and even with slamming back all 8 health potions, she always seemed to come out on top. There were times where I would get close to sealing the deal, but she would pop her health potion and almost regenerate back to full HP. Restocking on consumables and frankly, overbuying them, I was finally able to defeat her. It's funny because originally I said that I didn't want Caius to rely on potions for his victories, and yet here he is. Having all of these crutches makes me feel like a lazy fighter, and allows me to throw all sort of tactic and strategy out the window. Nevertheless, I kept the pressure on, stayed in her face as she did with me, and kept wailing away. Soon she dropped dead, and gone was my first crux of this playthrough. However, the next match was the one I was probably dreading the most. The 3 Argonian prisoners fight. It never really mattered what my playstyle was while going through the arena. Practically any time I arrived at this match, the first battle of gladiators, I'd have a tough time. The Argonians have decent stats, including health and attack power. 2 of them fight with fists, while the third fights with a sword. If you don't focus your efforts on one of them and systematically eliminate each one, it's going to be difficult. Even while trying to single out a lone Argonian, the other 2 are really good at bringing on the attack. I died during this match more than I'd care to admit. I was even thinking of throwing in the towel here for good, but I decided that Caius wasn't a quitter. Paying a visit to Vilverin, clearing out the bandits and looting all of the treasures within, I sold them off for some extra pocket change and turned to the drink. The drink being health potions. You see, Caius is no longer a skooma addict. No, he's a health potion addict. I was able to snag 24 consumables in total for preparation for this fight. Even after doing so, I still lost the fight a couple more times. Finally though, I was able to come on top, and here's what my strategy was. Focus on the Argonian with the sword first. He hit the hardest and had the best blocking capabilities. This sapped up most of my time and potions, leaving me with under half of them left. Once he was out of the picture, then my sights were set on either opponent, but making sure I was solely focusing on one of them. As soon as they were defeated, I moved on to the last one. I felt pretty lucky having a few pots left at this point, as I could pretty much tell that the fight was over. A couple dozen punches later, all 3 Argonians were defeated, and I only had 6 matches left to go. Owen put it best for this next fight. 1 enemy was much easier to face than 3. The Khajiit was tough though, so I'll give him that. He fought with an elven longsword and shield. My tactic was to attempt to drain his fatigue first, in order to stagger and drop him to the floor. Caius' opponent's health wasn't lowering by that much though, and my stamina bar wasn't doing me any favors. Fortunately, through persistence and patience, I was able to come out on top. I'll spare you the future details, but in between almost every single fight, I was heading over to All Things Alchemical in Skingrad in order to buy out Philanu's stock of potions. Back to the arena, the last fight as a gladiator was against a Breton wielding a longsword. Even though he gave me a run for my money, at this point, it's not saying that much. I had to pop those newly acquired health potions, but the match ran pretty standard. We took turns swinging on each other, I would cast my spells, he would occasionally fall to the ground, etc. Delivering the killing blow, I only had a few more matches to go now. Soon, Caius would be the grand champion, and he would make the Nerevarine proud. The next opponent was the former Blades member. I wondered if he would have recognized Cosades at all if this was the real deal, and if so, how would the fight have gone down? Well, it seems that they don't train the Blades nearly as well as people say they do. I quote-unquote only had to pop 6 health potions during this battle, which should make the other guy feel bad about his efforts. He swung around his Akaviri katana and used his shield to block my fist, but ultimately only the Grand Spymaster was left standing. From here on out, with only 3 fights left, they got pretty interesting. A spellcasting Altmer came rushing out and let me have it. His destruction magic was devastating, and he wasn't so bad with a blade. The difference between him and the last mage was that this one could actually cast ranged spells, meaning that even at a distance, I was never truly safe. The cherry on top was that he was able to resist both of my spells due to his enchanted shield, the Grey Aegis. Luckily, he was never able to properly best me, and his light armor made him pretty squishy as an opponent. With him defeated, there were now only 2 matches left, although they weren't going to be a cakewalk, or so I thought. It was me and Porkchop versus an archer, a spellcaster, and the yellow team's champion. I figured the champion was going to be the trickiest, so I started out with focusing her. What I had failed to account for, however, was how overpowered Porkchop was going to be. Their sorceress came rushing in, and in a matter of moments, the boar had mauled her. He had even managed to temporarily trap the champion in the walkout tunnel. This gave me enough time to charge on in against the archer, and I mean, come on. As I worked him like a punching bag, Porkchop was actively fighting against the champion, who was still aggroed onto me. By the time the archer was dead, come on, the yellow team champion had maybe 1/5 of her health left. That's when I decided to let the boar finish what he had started and maul her to death as well. With all 3 opponents slain, there was only one person left standing in the way of Grand Champion, the Grey Prince, Agranat Gromalog. Challenging him to a fight, I chose the Crimson Blade as my nickname, which felt right for Caius. Meeting Agranat in the arena, I knew I was in for a rough time. Practically every other opponent in the arena is level to the character. The only one that isn't is Gromalog. He instead is the perfect level 10 warrior. If I was level 25, great value Caius Cosades, easy match, we're going home early. But as level 2, bottom of the barrel Caius, no way this was happening without a plethora of health potions. It's not even that he hit that hard, or was able to send me flying across the arena with one twirl, it was the fact that I was barely able to do any damage to him. Heavy attacks, magic, light attacks, it didn't matter, his health wasn't budging. So I had to put Caius' potion addiction into overdrive and stock up on his favorite. The fight was long, it was dirty, it was grueling, it was punishing, and I didn't feel that good about the victory in the end. But hey, game is game. In order to successfully beat the Grey Prince, I needed to pop 29 weak health potions. In the grand scheme of things, it's not the worst, and for a level 2 altered monk fighting against the perfect level 10 warrior, it might actually be acceptable. With Agronacromalog defeated, Caius Cosades had officially become the new Grand Champion and established the perfect cover for his blade's operation. Here's what I learned from this experience. The monk class is kind of difficult to play as. I by no means am a hardcore gamer, nor am I that skilled at combat in this game, but it was hard. Granted, Caius' build and lack of offensive or defensive assets just make it so much worse. You can tell that he was meant to be the guy who talks and gives orders, and not necessarily the Emperor's personal bodyguard. I already knew this part, but once again, it's been proven that potions win fights. They carried this playthrough as they've done with so many others. Otherwise, call it as you will, but I would have been hard stopped at the final warrior fight, and in some ways, that's where the challenge of it all ended. Lastly, it's tricky to make characters that are so artificially advanced in levels like Great Value Caius. Sure, you can raise them to level 25, but how do you distribute the skills and attribute points evenly so that way the character is evenly leveled? That I have no clue and ask your help with for the future. Thus ends Caius Cosades' adventure through Oblivion's Arena faction, and until next time, keep on adventuring.